Chapter 101, Turf War. Castor had been lucky enough to enter the dream realm near the city and arrive at the castle much earlier than the three of them. By the time Sunny, Nephis, and Cassie had found their way to the human settlement, he was already in good standing there. Despite the fact that there were a lot of opportunities for a talented legacy to rise through the ranks of Gunlog's army, he had nevertheless decided to remain independent and eventually joined the Changing Stars cohort, drastically raising their combat strength and reputation. Looking back, that was when all of Sunny's problems had really started. That's right. It was all his fault, not mine. Yeah, definitely. Grinding his teeth, Sunny kicked the heavy chest and cursed under his breath. Then, acting as if nothing had happened, he smiled brightly and left the hidden chamber once again. Down below, things were getting interesting. Attracted by the smell of blood, several monsters tried to enter the ruined cathedral to feast on the fresh corpses. However, the Black Knight was as full of wrath as ever. Just as Sunny climbed onto the support beams, he was finishing off a large creature that looked like a praying mantis made of human skin. Initially, Sunny planned to take a look at the material possessions left behind by the 5 unfortunate thugs. But the sight of the ferocious battle made him change his mind. He would have to do it later. Besides, his shadow had already looked through the bloody remains and came to the conclusion that there was nothing really valuable among the dismembered corpses. Not wasting any more time, Sunny escaped through the roof of the cathedral and retraced his steps to the place where he had fought the Blood Fiend. The body of the hunting party's leader was still there. Of course, his memories had long disappeared, leaving the bearded man dressed only in rags. The heavy battle axe was gone too. Sunny sighed. That's why killing people is not worth it. His shadow covered its face with a hand and shook its head dejectedly, trying to express that his wording was nothing short of unfortunate. Sunny frowned. What? It's not. And for him, it was doubly so. When one awakened killed another, they received a considerable portion of the enemy's soul essence without having to shatter their soul shard. Sunny, however, was not an ordinary awakened. His aspect was based on consuming shadow fragments instead. That meant that even if his enemy had absorbed hundreds of soul shards in the past, Sunny would only receive the number of shadow fragments matching their rank and class, just like he would after slaying a nightmare creature. Since all sleepers were mere dormant beasts, in this case, the number was 1. Just 1 fragment away from 400, Sunny said, a bit disheartened. All that work for nothing. Some small, rational piece of his mind was actually relieved that killing humans was not very lucrative. Otherwise, in his state, no, he wouldn't, surely. Wouldn't what? Sunny blinked a couple of times, waiting for his inner voice to answer. However, it was strangely silent. Shrugging, he bent down and searched the dead man's body, hoping to find something of value. However, he was left disappointed. There was no pouch full of soul shards as he had imagined. All Sunny found was a strange piece of fabric that had been secretively tucked away into the tall thug's shirt. Looking at the fabric, he noticed crude shapes drawn on it with ink. Some shapes looked strangely familiar. Is that a map? Indeed, it was a primitive map. The shapes he recognized were the various landmarks located in the neighboring parts of the cursed city. Sunny knew many of them by heart, and had even explored a few in the past. A treasure map? Suddenly, the strange timing of the hunting party's arrival and their lack of experience made perfect sense. They weren't actually hunters. Instead, they were a bunch of fools who had been swindled by some smart person back at the castle into buying a fake treasure map. At least that was the most likely possibility. However, but what if it's real? Sunny blinked, looking at the map with a mix of distaste and avarice. He couldn't decide whether he should try and follow it or throw it away. Luckily, his thought process was interrupted by a thunderous crash. One of the buildings not far from where he was standing suddenly collapsed, filling the street with a cloud of dust and flying debris. A massive shape flew through the air and heavily crashed against another wall, causing an avalanche of stones to fall down. The creature tried to stand up, but then twitched and grew still, spilling rivers of fetid blood all over the pavement. It was unmistakably dead. Sunny quickly hid the map in his armor and dove into the shadows, trying to understand what was happening. Somewhere near, Furious roars and the sound of steel clashing against steel could be heard, growing closer with each second. Strangely, there were no human voices. A battle between nightmare creatures? Such things were not rare in the cursed city, but to Sunny's knowledge, there were very few things capable of challenging the current masters of this street and the adjacent square. These creatures were not the most powerful among the inhabitants of the city, but due to their unique characteristics, Sunny tried to avoid them like the plague. He saw several monsters much more powerful than anything he would be willing to take on, ending up sliced and diced into tiny pieces on that square. However, none of them was able to give the protectors of the square as much trouble as they were having right now, at least judging by the desperate sounds of the battle. Intrigued, Sunny decided to take a look. Hidden in the shadows, he climbed up the tall wall of an ancient building and soon arrived on its roof. Watching his footing, Sunny walked forward until he reached the opposite edge of the building. From there, he could see the wide square in all its dark glory. In the middle of the square, a moving statue was fighting against several hulking monsters. Chapter 102: Stone Saint. On a dark square surrounded by ruins of once magnificent buildings, a vicious battle was coming to an end. The remains of its solemn protectors were lying on the cold cobblestones, ruthlessly shattered into pieces. Sunny blinked in shock. They actually lost. He was really astonished. The living statues that used to guard the square were a very tough bunch. As far as nightmare creatures of the cursed city went, they weren't the most formidable in terms of size and physical might. However, their strange bodies were extremely durable and capable of withstanding truly devastating amounts of damage. Aside from that, the stalwart stone warriors were also disciplined, proficient in the use of weapons, and utterly deadly. They were able to perfectly coordinate their movements, using strategy and tactics to silently overwhelm opponents whose power far surpassed their own. Countless monsters fell to their blades. That's why Sunny had always avoided getting into a confrontation with these weird creatures. Even though they weren't fallen by rank, the stone revenants represented a threat that was enough to make him wary. However, now the ownership of the square was about to change hands. The bodies of the previous masters lay shattered to pieces. In death, they looked just like broken statues. Even their metal armor and weapons had turned to stone after the wielders were destroyed. There were 5 or 6 of these stone piles scattered around the square, while the attackers seemed to have lost only 3 of their numbers, including the massive monster that had been sent crashing through a building earlier. Each body towered above the dark cobblestones like a small hill. The invaders were of a type of the nightmare creature that Sunny had never seen before. These new menacing monsters looked like giant spiders with bodies covered in thick plates of wrought iron. They moved with terrifying speed and force, sending cracks running through the cobblestones with each step. There were currently 2 of them left on the square, circling around the lone surviving stone warrior. The last of the living statues seemed to be a female. Compared to the spiders, she was almost comically small in stature, standing no taller than Sunny himself. The graceful stone creature was armed with a sword and a round shield, wearing a plate armor that covered most of her body, leaving only the eyes exposed. Or, rather, 2 rubies burning with crimson flames that these creatures had instead of eyes. Her armor and weapons were black in color, forged from some unknown and incredibly heavy stone-like alloy. Of course, in reality, they were made out of the same stone as their wielder. However, the dark force that had turned the granite body of this nightmare creature into the strange approximation of flesh had also turned the stone armor into metal. Currently, the last of the living statues was standing with her shield raised, the blade of the sword resting on its rim. Her head was lowered, ruby eyes silently following the movements of the 2 spider monsters. Sunny didn't know for sure, but he suspected that these spiders were both fallen beasts. In any case, the stone woman was doomed. Her enemies were just toying with her, savoring the helplessness of their victim before finishing the job. He didn't really care. In fact, he was waiting for the show. Watching nightmare creatures slaughter each other was one of his favorite pastimes, and the best thing about it was that it didn't matter who won. Come on, get her. However, in the next moment, he was surprised. In a strange turn of events, the stone monster lunged at the spiders first. Calmly striking her sword against the rim of the shield twice, she dashed forward with grim determination. The spider she was aiming at was a second too late to react. However, due to its superior physical form, it was still able to meet the sudden onslaught with a vicious strike of its own. One of its legs shot forward, threatening to shatter the stone body of the attacking living statue into tiny pieces. The smaller creature deflected the blow with her sword and bashed the spider with the round shield, putting all of her weight and inhuman strength into the strike. Sunny blinked as the massive body of the fallen beast was thrown back and toppled over. The black sword immediately lashed out, sending a shockwave through the spider's guts. A rain of strikes fell on the iron surface of the monster's abdomen, filling the square with the clangor of metal. The stone warrior attacked with savage ferocity, using both the sword and the shield to inflict as much damage as possible in a short amount of time. Just as the iron plate protecting the soft innards of the monster cracked, the second beast joined the fray. The following bloodbath was nothing short of horrifying. Despite the fact that the spiders were much faster and stronger, the steadfast stone wraith kept up with them for a while. Her indomitable will and ruthless resolve were enough to give the fearsome creatures pause. Moving with the deadly precision of a bloodthirsty killing machine, the living statue completely disregarded self-preservation in favor of making her enemies suffer. It seemed as though she was determined to take them to the grave with her. Soon, the terrible wounds on her body accumulated, making the stone creature look like a vandalized piece of macabre art. However, the spiders were no better. Their fetid blood was spilling everywhere, painting the whole square red. Severed limbs and shards of cracked iron littered the ground, mixing with the shattered remains of the fallen stone warriors. Finally, one of the spiders fell heavily to the ground and twitched, drawing its last breath. The remaining beast lunged at the staggered stone monster, its countless eyes burning with fury. The round black shield rose one last time and then flew aside, torn away along with the right arm of the stalwart living statue. However, almost at the same time, the blade of her sword pierced through the massive beast's skull, ending its life just a moment before breaking apart and turning to stone. Sunny shook his head. What an impressive sight. A lowly, awakened creature slaying two fallen beasts. Midnight Shard would have liked that fierce last stand a lot. Come to think of it, this was nothing short of inconceivable. However, the graceful stone warrior paid dearly for performing the bloody miracle. Staggering once again, she fell heavily to the ground, clearly done for. The battle for the ownership of the Dark Square was over. Nobody won. Chapter 103, Coup de Grace. As the dust settled, Sunny abandoned his hiding spot on the roof of one of the buildings surrounding the square and jumped down. Avoiding the puddles of fetid blood, he walked among the corpses littering the ground and approached the dying stone monster. The nightmare creature was lying on her back, her body battered and broken. From up close, Sunny was able to see it better. The black armor of the strange monster was slowly turning to stone. In its gaps, he could see her slightly lighter skin. It was smooth like polished granite and dark gray in color. Streams of ruby dust was flowing from the terrible wounds, looking almost like blood. Two crimson gems that served her as eyes slowly moved, focusing on Sunny. There was no particular expression in them, just tired stillness. The flames that used to burn inside were slowly dimming. The statuesque creature stared at him without making a sound. In fact, Sunny wasn't sure that these monsters were even capable of producing sounds. Throughout the whole fight, she had remained eerily silent. He sighed. Life is not fair, huh? With these words, he summoned the Midnight Shard and thrust it through the visor of the dying creature's helm. Even at the death's door, the stone-like flesh of the living statue proved to be extremely tough. However, he put enough strength into his strike, not wishing to make the poor thing suffer more than necessary. He was always glad to kill a nightmare creature, but this one deserved a quick death. To be honest, he was very impressed by the small stone warrior's desperate last stand. They didn't know who they were messing with, but you showed them. At that moment, the familiar voice of the spell resounded in the darkness. You have slain an awakened monster, Stone Saint. Your shadow grows stronger. Sunny smiled. That's 4 shadow fragments, finally. 403. However, in the next second, he forgot what he was thinking about, because the spell wasn't done talking. Whispering into his ear, it slowly said, You have received an Echo Stone Saint. Sunny's eyes opened wide. Did he hear it right? An echo? He had finally received another echo? Cautiously looking around, Sunny lowered his voice and said to the shadow, "You heard it too, right?" The shadow stared at Sunny in exasperation, then gestured at its mouth, lowered its hands and didn't say anything. He smiled. "Exactly. That's what the spell said." Humming a song, he paced back and forth for some time, then suddenly flinched. "Oh, right. I should get out of here. Now that the stone people are gone, who knows what kind of horrors will try to make this square their nest." He made a move to leave, but then stopped and looked at the scene of slaughter with avarice. "However, I really should get some mementos first. It's not every day that you stumble upon that many dead nightmare creatures before the carrion eaters arrive to feast on the corpses. This was a chance he won't get anytime soon." Sunny hesitated for a few seconds, trying to decide which monsters to approach first. The spiders were obviously much stronger. If they were really of the fallen rank, their soul shards would be incredibly valuable. However, buying anything with a bunch of ascended soul shards would be very suspicious. Plus, it would take a while to find the crystals inside the massive bodies of the giant beasts. The living statues were of the lower rank, but their shattered remains were easy to search. The other inhabitants of the cursed city could arrive at any minute. So, with a deep sigh, Sunny ran to the nearest pile of shattered stones and kneeled beside it, hoping to notice the gleam of the soul shards as soon as possible. He was barely done with the second dead statue when a sudden noise made him stop. Knowing that greed had doomed a lot of people to their deaths, Sunny suppressed the desire to linger here to the last possible moment and quickly dashed away, putting the last crystal he had managed to find inside his armor on the run. Summoning the kunai, he threw it into the air and then pulled on the invisible string, making the dagger spin around a stone column. As soon as the string coiled itself around the column, he jumped and made the string contract, sending him flying up. Just like the golden rope, the invisible string that connected the kunai to his wrist was incredibly sturdy and capable of changing its length at will, which allowed Sunny to use the throwing dagger as an improvised grappling hook from time to time. Using the top of the stone column to jump even higher, he grabbed onto the cracks in the wall of one of the ruined buildings and quickly climbed up. By the time he reached the roof, the noises produced by the approaching creature were already loud enough to make him shiver. Whatever that thing was, Sunny didn't want to find out. The sound it produced while moving made him think of a giant snake, one with countless mouths, each hissing the notes of a strange, maddening tune. Luckily, he left the wide square just in time to never meet that abomination. By the time Sunny had returned to the ruined cathedral, the night was already coming to the end. The eastern horizon was growing lighter, and the sound of the black waves crushing against the city wall was growing restless. Walking across the support beams stretching above the grand hall, he caught the glimpse of the marching Black Knight and sighed. One day he was going to kill the bastard on some glorious day, but not this day. Today, he had other things to do. Reaching the safety of his hidden lair, Sunny put the soul shards into his treasure chest and then sat down on a magnificent wooden chair. There was an excited smile on his face. It was finally time to find out what was the difference between a normal echo and one transformed into a shadow. Chapter 104, Soul Arsenal. Not wasting any more time, Sunny dove into his soul sea. Despite his changed mental state, it was as calm as always. The silent expanse of still water stretched into the empty distance, with the shadow core hovering above like a dark star. Tiny spheres of light floated in the air around it, reflecting on the surface of the tranquil sea. The silent shadows were still there, standing motionless at the edge of darkness. Compared to before, their ranks had swelled. Monsters of all shapes and sizes were among them now, making Sunny's collection of slain enemies look increasingly impressive. Walking past them, he glanced at one or another from time to time, recalling the thrilling battles with a mix of dread and pride. This was his personal museum, a dark monument to all his sins. Wait, sins? Why sins? Just at that moment, Sunny stumbled and stopped. Not too far away from him, a gaunt shadow stood among the menagerie of terrifying creatures, silently staring at him with empty eyes. That shadow once belonged to a young man, not much older than Sunny himself. He had lived in the ramshackle settlement beyond the castle's gates, struggling to survive like everybody else. Before. Sonny looked away. "Don't you look at me like that. It was your own fault, fool. You shouldn't have asked me all those questions." Out of the 3 people he had murdered with his own hands, this kill was the only one that made Sonny feel something. Because it wasn't done in the heat of the battle or to settle a personal score. This one was done in cold blood. It was why he had to leave the castle, among other things. Sonny grimaced. "I said stop looking at me. Just stay dead and don't bother me with your nonsense." Huffing angrily, he turned away. Soon he walked past the shadows of the Blood Fiend, the hunting party's leader, and the deadly Stone Saint. Glancing at the statuesque figure of the stone monster, Sonny forgot all about the gaunt shadow and smiled. He was here to take a look at her echo, after all. The prospect of having another echo under his command was already very exciting. The loyal and strangely personable scavenger had been of great help to Sonny in the past, tremendously increasing his combat performance. After all, despite having a divine aspect and a uniquely powerful ability, Sonny was still just a dreamer, one whole rank below the echo. The scavenger, however, was merely a beast, while the Stone Saint was a monster. Her power was comparable to that of the ferocious carapace centurions, far surpassing anything that Sonny could ever hope to achieve in this cursed place. The strange nature of the steadfast living statue made her even more formidable. Having a servant like that would make many impossible things possible. However, Sonny wanted even more. He was waiting to see what miracle his aspect was going to perform, hoping that the results would surpass his wildest expectations. Soon, he was standing under the black sun of his shadow core, observing the spheres of light that represented his memories. There were 9 of them now. The ones that he actually used were the puppeteer's shroud, the midnight shard, the prowling thorn, the ordinary rock, and the endless spring. Savoring the anticipation, Sonny summoned each of them one by one and read the glowing runes surrounding the memories. He had gotten the heavy kunai after defeating a peculiar creature that resembled a monstrous armored porcupine. The rain of jagged bone quills had left several holes in Sonny's body, but the reward was well worth it. Memory. Prowling thorn. Memory rank. Awakened. Memory tier 2. Memory type. Weapon. Memory description. This flying dagger is as unpredictable and fickle as the affection of a young beauty, but, perhaps, not as deadly. Memory enchantments. Rose of betrayal. Enchantment description. The prowling thorn is connected to its wielder by an invisible string. This string is strong but mercurial, just like the treacherous bond of sentimental attachment. After reading this description for the first time, Sonny couldn't help but wonder if the spell had been scorned by a lover once. The runes practically exuded bitterness. Next on the list was his most dangerous memory, the talking rock. Memory, ordinary rock. Memory rank, awakened. Memory tier, I. Memory type, tool. Memory description, just an ordinary rock. Memory enchantments. Not really. Enchantment description. The word is mightier than the sword. The rock is mightier than the word. The funny thing was that the ordinary rock, which was capable of repeating various sounds, had fallen into the hands of a person who was unable to tell lies. It was now the most honest memory in 2 whole worlds. It had also made Sonny think twice before opening his mouth. Sometimes. The last memory he decided to take a look at was, perhaps, the most precious to him. It was the beautiful glass bottle that Cassie had given Sonny as a farewell gift. Memory. Endless spring. Memory rank. Dormant. Memory tier 5. Memory type tool. Memory description. A lovesick devil had once imprisoned a mighty river in this fragile glass bottle. It was his gift to a beautiful desert spirit. Memory enchantments. Gift of water. Enchantment description. This bottle contains enough water to make flowers bloom in the desolate heart of the most lifeless of deserts. This one was sort of romantic. It seemed as though the spell was all over the place when coming up with these descriptions, to the point where Sonny couldn't even tell if it was being serious. With a sigh, he dismissed the sphere of light containing the endless spring and glanced up. The other 4 of his memories were not very useful. They were an incredibly heavy tower shield, a suit of armor that was worse than the puppeteer's shroud in every regard, a glass eye capable of producing bright beams of harmless red light, and the obnoxiously loud silver bell, the first memory he had ever gotten. The remaining 3 had been awarded to him for killing comparatively weak monsters on the streets of the cursed city. He was hoping to trade them for something more suitable during his next visit to the castle, whenever that might be. Forgetting about the memories, Sonny finally focused his attention on the brightest sphere of light that was floating in the dark emptiness above his head, the one containing his new echo. He willed it to descend and watched as the sphere glided down, softly touching the surface of dark water a few moments later. It slowly dimmed, revealing the stone figure hidden within. Here in the dark silence of the Soul Sea, the stone saint looked just like a statue. She was approximately as tall as Sonny, looking miniature in comparison to the rest of the nightmare creatures he had to face on the forgotten shore. She was also uniquely human-like in appearance. If not for the dark gray hue and the stone-like nature of her granite skin, Sonny might have even mistaken the strange monster for a sleeper, provided he couldn't see much of her body behind the graceful dark armor. The nature of these strange creatures remained a mystery. Chapter 105, Living Stone. Previously, Sonny had considered the living statues to be just that, monuments brought to life by evil spirits. There were a lot of revenants like that walking the streets of the cursed city. Take the Black Knight, for example. Sonny was almost sure that the bastard was actually just a suit of armor with a vengeful wraith imprisoned within it. He had no proof that there was an actual body in that moving steel fortress, at least. However, after watching the Stone Saint die right before his eyes, he wasn't so sure that she and the Black Knight were the same anymore. There certainly were similarities. Even the design of their armors was somewhat similar, as though one had originated from the other. But the Stone Warrior's armor seemed much more ancient. And then there was the ruby dust that flowed from the stone creature's wounds instead of blood. Since when did statues have blood? It was almost like these strange creatures were designed to possess their own weird form of life. Come think about it. The stone warriors resembled artificial beings brought to life by some dark magic, much more than they resembled undead creatures. Mysteries, mysteries, mysteries all around. Perhaps the runes describing the Stone Saint would provide him with some answers. The echo, meanwhile, was coming to life. 2 magenta flames ignited in her gemstone eyes. The stone of her armor suddenly gleamed with subtle metal shine. The smooth surface of her granite skin turned slightly less rigid, silently turning her head. The saint gazed at Sonny through the narrow split of her helmet's visor. Let's see. He concentrated on the runes. Echo Stone Saint. Echo rank, awakened. Echo class, monster. Echo attributes. Battlemaster, stalwart. Mark of divinity. Sonny blinked. Mark of divinity? That was the same as his original attribute. What business did a nightmare creature have walking around with the traces of divinity left in its evil, corrupted soul? And what with these other attributes? Battlemaster attribute description. Born on the battlefield, the Stone Saint is proficient in all forms of combat. Stalwart attribute description. The Stone Saint is highly resistant to all forms of damage, as well as being fully immune to mind and soul attacks. Bewildered, Sonny shook his head. No wonder these silent stone warriors were so deadly. They were literally a bunch of killing machines created to last as long and deal as much damage as possible on the battlefield. But who had created them? Leaving the attributes alone, he lowered his gaze and read the next line of runes. Echo description. Deep in the cavernous halls of his dark domain, the last child of the unknown had created them from stone to quell the fire burning in his resentful heart. However, that fire only grew hotter. Designed to bring peace, they were instead born into an endless war. The unknown again. Or rather, their children. It seemed like his theory was correct. The Stone Saint was either an artificial being or a descendant of one. In any case, that was before she was corrupted by, well, whatever it was that had corrupted all the nightmare creatures, and especially those in the cursed city. Now even gods wouldn't be able to describe what exactly she was. Not that it mattered. A monster was a monster. Sonny was more interested in the fact that the traces of divinity that the stone warrior bore had to have come from their original creator, who was at least partially one of the unknown, which meant that the unknown, indeed, were closely related to the gods and to divinity itself, just like mysterious Weaver. Looking away from the runes, Sunny studied the motionless echo with his altered eyes. What he saw made him smile darkly. Just like the memories, the true essence of the echo was weaved from the countless diamond strings that formed an infinitely complex pattern. Only in its case, the pattern was even more elaborate, dwarfing anything that Sunny had previously seen. Two embers were burning inside the stone saint's body, serving as anchors for the endless strings. One of them was situated in the place where her heart should have been, the other in the lower part of her abdomen. Sunny closed one eye and looked more closely. And there, behind the shining pattern of the diamond strings, he noticed another, much more primitive and crude system of adamantine threads. They pierced the stone flesh of the echo, resembling a human nervous system. These strings were also seemingly made from diamond, but they were much less ethereal. In fact, they were entirely corporeal. Sunny frowned. Makes sense. That makes sense. Wait, how does it make sense? The memories and the echoes were created by the spell. They were artificial. The stone saint too was artificial, but in a much more mundane sense. She was made by a child of the unknown, just like her echo was made by the spell. Which meant what? That the technique that had been used to create the stone saint was eerily similar to the technique that the spell used, although it did look extremely primitive in comparison. Could that mean that the spell itself had come from the unknown? Sunny grimaced and shook his head. No, no. Although it was a sound theory, there was too little information to actually consider it substantiated or even remotely believable. He needed to find out more, learn more, uncover more before even beginning to understand the true story that connected the spell, the gods, the unknown, and his own life into one nightmarish tapestry. But there would be time for it later. Right now, he had something equally as interesting right within his grasp. Glancing one last time at the graceful stone monster, Sunny gulped and licked his lips. Then, he said timidly, Let's do this." Taking a step forward, he hesitated and then carefully put his hand on the breastplate of the stone saint's armor, right across from the place where the main nexus of her spell weave was situated. To his surprise, the breastplate felt like stone and was warm to the touch. It was as though a furious crimson flame was burning inside the nightmare creature's chest. Huh? As soon as Sunny touched the echo, a new string of runes appeared in the air in front of him. Transform echo into a shadow. He hesitated, once again afraid to make the choice. What was he going to do if the process made the stone saint weaker, or even useless? Trying not to think of this possibility, Sunny sighed and forced himself to say, yes. An imperceptible change happened to the soul sea, as though a gust of wind suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The tranquil dark water seemed to simultaneously stay still and move restlessly. Then a sudden pressure came from somewhere above. Raising his head, Sunny saw two dark beams descending from the depths of the shadow core. One of them fell on the echo, while the other landed on one of the silent shadows that stood motionlessly behind his back, as though connecting them together. Bathed in the dark light, the shadow of the dead stone saint slowly dissolved into it. And then the echo began to change. Chapter 106. Creating a monster. Under Sunny's watchful eyes, the echo began to change. The light falling from the shadow core seemed to seep into the flesh of the stone creature, making it shine with dark radiance. Wisps of shadowy fog emanated from beneath her impervious plate armor, slowly merging with it. It looked as though the stone saint was engulfed in ghostly black flame, being remade by it. What little color there was on her body was washed away and replaced with nothing but darkness. Only two crimson fires burning in her ruby eyes remained, slightly changing their hue and becoming more menacing. Of course, all these changes were happening on the surface, if not for the traumatic transformation that Sunny had gone through to inherit a part of Weaver's forbidden lineage. This would have been all he saw. However, with his eyes altered by the agony of consuming the drop of divine blood, he was able to see much more. Beneath the surface, the essence of the echo was being changed as well, in a way much more fundamental than its outer appearance. The shining embers that served as anchors for the weave of diamond strings had lost their radiance, becoming as transparent and empty as the shadow core itself. The diamond strings were gone, replaced by a sea of darkness. That darkness had a form, a shape that perfectly followed the lines of the stone saint's body. It was as though a living shadow was now inhabiting it, usurping the role that had been played by the pattern of the sorceress strings once. Although similar in appearance to the original echo, this new creature was a completely different type of existence. Sunny had never seen anything like it before. It was created by his aspect, after all. The process of transformation, meanwhile, was coming to the end. The ray of dark light cast by the shadow core was disappearing, its reflection drowning in the calm water of the silent sea. The black flames were already fully absorbed by the stone-like armor of the saint, gone with the dark radiance of her smooth granite skin. Sunny observed the stone saint, clad in the lusterless black armor, with two ruby flames burning in the deep shadows of the visor. She looked like an incarnation of pure darkness, a noble demon sent to wage war against heaven from the depths of hell. What changed the most, however, was her presence. Before, the echo felt like an empty shell, a magical tool rather than an actual being. Now, however, there were hints of mysterious will in her crimson eyes, a subtle sense there was a nascent spark of sentience burning somewhere deep within her lightless soul, or whatever it was that the menacing monster had instead of a soul. This was a shadow. Just as this thought appeared in Sunny's mind, the faintly familiar voice of the spell resounded above the dark waters of the Soul Sea. "You have created a shadow monster, Stone Saint." Hearing these words, Sunny smiled. However, a second later, the smile disappeared from his lips, replaced by a pained expression. Only now, after the process was complete, he felt a subtle emptiness permeating his whole body. He felt weakened. The loss of 100 shadow fragments was finally making its effect known. He had suspected that spending them in this way would reverse the process of power accumulation that had consumed him for these last few months, but it was still an unpleasant feeling. He was much stronger than he had been during the journey through the labyrinth. However, some of his physical might was unmistakably gone, leaving him with a bitter feeling of regret. No, he had known that this would happen and decided to proceed with the experiment anyway. It was well worth it. Forgetting about the change in his physical state, Sunny walked around his shadow and observed her from different sides. The stone saint's eyes silently followed his movements, sending glints of crimson light reflecting from the black surface of the tranquil sea. This is amazing. I wonder what she is capable of. Summoning the runes, Sunny immediately noticed that there was a new cluster shining right beneath the one describing his echoes. Shadows, Stone Saint, excited to learn more about his new pet monster. Sunny was about to concentrate his attention on the runes, but then stopped and glanced down at his own shadow, a little embarrassed. Sorry. How are you feeling, buddy? You aren't, jealous or anything?" The shadow looked away and pretended that it didn't know him. It was seemingly indifferent to the appearance of a new shadow creature in his service, even though this new shadow had a capital letter to its name. "Well, I just wanted to say that you shouldn't be. I still value you very much, even though the Stone Saint is probably capable of slicing powerful monsters into tiny pieces with her sword, while you're still just a useless piece of, an incredibly capable scout. And my most trusted confidant, I still appreciate you. Yeah." He stared at the shadow for a bit and, seeing that it didn't react in any way, turned away. This guy, he'd better step up his game. Focusing on the runes, Sunny summoned the description of the shadow and read, "Shadow Stone Saint. Shadow rank, awakened. Shadow class, monster. Shadow attributes, battle master, stalwart, spark of divinity." Sunny blinked. It seemed as though Stone Saint's divine attribute had evolved to match his own. Was it because he was her master? This was a nice surprise. However, he still didn't see how she was different from before. Frowning, he continued to look through the shimmering runes. Shadow description. Shadow Saint was created by the treacherous lost from light in the cursed darkness of the forgotten shore. Again with this whole treachery stuff, can I get another epithet, huh? But in the next moment, he forgot all about this little frustration, because the following line of runes showed him something really unexpected. Just beneath the description, a familiar set of runes shined in the air. Shadow fragments, 0, 1200, 100. Chapter 107, Growing Shadow. Sunny stared at the runes, perplexed. Then, a sudden light of understanding appeared in his eyes. He finally realized what was the principal difference between an echo and a shadow. It was really very simple. The echoes were mere replicas of the creatures that had left them behind. They were molded in their image and never changed, always remaining the same as the originals at the moment of their deaths. Shadows, however, were different. After all, they were mercurial by nature, always changing their forms and shapes depending on the environment. And so a shadow was capable of change to some extent too. It was capable of growth. His eyes widened. By slaying nightmare creatures, he was able to absorb their shadow fragments and become stronger. Eventually, his shadow core was bound to evolve, turning from dormant to awakened and beyond. The jump in power that came with this evolution was nothing short of unmatched. Granted, he wasn't sure about the particular details of this process, not to mention that, as a human, he could only become an awakened after returning from the dream realm into the real world, which was impossible to do in this godforsaken place. He also didn't know what would happen if he actually managed to accumulate the 1,000 shadow fragments that the runes demanded. But no matter what happened, if he were to continue walking forward on the path of the awakened, he would eventually outgrow his memories and echoes, rendering them weak and useless against the enemies of the comparable rank. He would then be forced to discard them and try to find suitable replacements, with no guarantee whatsoever that he would actually succeed. This problem was not as dire when it came to memories, which were comparatively easy to get. The echoes, however, were exceedingly rare. Once an echo grew too weak to accompany its master, replacing it was an extremely tall task. But shadows were capable of growing with him, becoming more powerful just as he grew more powerful. As long as Sunny was willing to put in the work, his shadow would never fall behind. The possibilities that this simple quality opened up were truly endless. It was enough to completely change his plans for the future. In the past, Sunny always envisioned himself as the main force on the battlefield, only relying on memories and a stray echo or two to support him. That was because echoes of higher ranks and classes were so unimaginably hard to come by. Although much more rare than memories, there were still many dormant echoes around, and a fair number of awakened ones too. They were mainly shared among masters and saints, who were capable of defeating the nightmare creature of these ranks with comparative ease. But battles against fallen and corrupted monsters, not to mention anything even more dreadful, were never easy. As such, there were not enough trophies brought back after killing creatures of their kind to make the idea of acquiring an echo of a higher rank a realistic possibility. For everyone except for Sunny, he could slaughter weaker monsters, get lesser echoes, and then cultivate them into unstoppable beasts of slaughter, not bound by the laws of probability and diminishing chances. He could slowly build an army of powerful shadows to fight his battles for him, and then watch them destroy his enemies from a safe distance while sipping on a cocktail. That's what rich people drank, right? Not to mention that monsters were not bound by the need to pass nightmares to raise their rank, at least not to Sunny's knowledge. To be honest, he had no idea how nightmare creatures evolved their cores. Carapace Demon had seemed to do just fine, just by eating the fruits of the soul tree and slowly absorbing large amounts of soul essence. In any case, there was a possibility that he would be able to make the Shadow Saint much more powerful than he himself had the chance to become on the Forgotten Shore. Perhaps even powerful enough to make his life here truly tolerable. Looking at the shadow with excited sparks dancing in his eyes, Sunny grinned from ear to ear. You and I are going to accomplish great things together, buddy. If his own shadow wasn't worried about its place in his heart yet, it would be smart to start worrying about it right about now. The question that was consuming Sunny's thoughts now was this: how exactly was he supposed to feed the Shadow Saint with fragments? If he could simply transfer some of his own to her, he would do it without a second thought, even though that would diminish his personal strength even further. However, there seemed to be no way to do so. No amount of looking at the runes, touching the silent stone creature, or trying to talk to the spell did the trick. Sunny even asked for advice from his own shadow, but that guy was in no mood to talk. The scornful word traitor was written all other his expressionless dark spot of a face. At least that's what Sunny read from it after being met with the silent treatment. In all the excitement, he failed to remember that the shadow was physically unable to speak. Scratching the back of his head, Sunny paced around the Soul Sea and tried to come up with a reasonable way to stuff some shadow fragments inside the taciturn stone monster. Well, the most obvious answer is to go and make her kill some nightmare creatures. However, will it work? When my loyal scavenger killed something, it was I who received the fragments, not him. Wait, him? Did Cassie infect me with her childish desire to assign human qualities to everything? It not him. It was I, and not it. Right? That's better. Wait, what was I talking about? Glancing at the outside world, Sunny frowned. It was currently the day there usually. He would be sound asleep by now. Going out during the day was dangerous. He would have to walk outside the shadows, allowing all kinds of fallen horrors to lay eyes on him. He only survived for so long in this hell by being extremely cautious, cowardly, and only hunting during the night. He paid a harsh price to learn these lessons, almost losing his life in the process. But still should he risk it? Chapter 108, Test Dummy. Still undecided, Sunny dismissed the stone saint. He was curious to see if the slumbering shadow would become a sphere of light just like an echo would. However, she did not. As soon as he gave the command, the ornate armor of the stone creature was immediately engulfed in black flame, and with a gust of ghostly wind she was gone. It seemed as though the shadow was returned into the embrace of the shadow core that had created her, and was now sleeping in its depths, bathed in the invisible waves of nurturing dark flames. Sunny scratched the back of his head. So, the shadows literally dwelled within the deepest part of his soul. He didn't really know how to feel about this, but felt that it was strangely fitting. He was a child of shadows himself, after all. With a thoughtful sigh, Sunny emerged from the Soul Sea and looked around his secret lair. Outside the ruined cathedral, the sun was shining above the cursed city, but none of its rays could reach this tranquil hidden chamber. Sunny suspected that once, long ago, the secret room served as the private quarters of a venerated young priestess who performed sacred rites in this temple. He had found some of her things in the modest wardrobe that was hidden behind a stone panel, somehow preserved in pristine condition, despite the thousands of years that had passed since the city had fallen to the curse of darkness. If not for the lamentable disparity of their genders, he would have had a whole collection of clothes to wear, instead of spending every waking hour dressed in the same good old puppeteer's shroud. There were limits to the amount of abuse that even a fifth-tier armor could withstand, however. In a sense, he was lucky. At least his armor was made out of soft fabric. It would have been much worse if he had to wear a suit of plate armor or a rusty chainmail instead. That priestess, of course, had not used the same extravagant method to enter her private quarters. There actually was a doorway that led outside the room and into a concealed corridor that ended with a narrow stairwell. However, the stairs had long collapsed, leaving only a deep vertical shaft behind. This was Sunny's route of escape in case someone or something would find his lair. Standing up from the magnificent wooden chair, Sunny paced around for a bit and then lit the fire under a makeshift stove, planning to make himself some late supper. The orange flames illuminated the hidden chamber, sending shadows dancing on its walls. Oh, right. I never got fresh meat. The night was so eventful that he had completely forgotten the initial purpose of his hunt. Throwing the last few strips of meat on the grill, he seasoned them with salt and sighed once again. The desire to simply venture outside and get into a fight with the nearest nightmare creature seemed more attractive with each minute. No, 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 that's how you end up dead. To distract himself from these seductive thoughts, Sunny decided to summon the Stone Saint into the material world and perform a few experiments in the safety of his secret lair. Standing up, he willed the shadow to appear. The secretive chamber was submerged in deep shadows. His own was hidden in one of them, standing with its arms crossed on the cold stone wall. In Sunny's vision, it appeared as a silhouette made from a deeper shade of black. Usually an echo would appear in front of the summoner, weaved from the countless sparks of moving light. However, the Stone Saint entrance was completely different. Instead of materializing out of thin air, she stepped out of his shadow like a sinister dark night. Wreathed in darkness, her elegant figure emanated a sense of danger and foreboding. First, two ruby eyes ignited in the depths of the shadow, Then, the darkness came to life and surged forward, taking the form of the deadly stone monster. The sole of her stone-like soleret touched the floor with a loud clang, and a moment later, the shadow saint was standing in the middle of his room, her hand resting on the pommel of her sword. Sunny grimaced, feeling a slight headache. So the shadow was hiding in a shadow, and then the shadow came out of the shadow to stand with it in the shadows. This is starting to get out of hand. I really need to come up with better terminology. He felt that this was a vital problem, but no suitable words came to his mind. Glancing at the silent duo, Sunny hesitantly asked, "Any ideas?" Sadly, both his shadow and his shadow were mute, and unable to voice their opinions even if they wanted to. Left with no assistance whatsoever, Sunny sighed. "All right, I'll think of something later. For now, let's see what you're capable of." Summoning his shadow, he wrapped himself in its comforting embrace and faced the stone saint, preparing to test her strength. Inhaling deeply, he focused and gave the menacing monster a command. "Strike me." Sunny expected that the shadow would hesitate for a moment, maybe even requiring some persuasion to turn on her master. Instead, the stone saint immediately leaned forward and punched him in the chest without a second thought. With his physical prowess enhanced by the shadow, Sunny was sure of his ability to withstand one blow from the awakened monster, at least to a certain degree. However, he was wrong. So wrong. Before he could even react, the armor-clad stone fist crashed into his ribs, making Sunny feel as though he was hit by a train. In the next second, he found himself lying on the floor, surrounded by numerous pieces of broken wood. Oh no, my chair. The magnificent chair was gone, ruthlessly turned into splinters and firewood by the impact with his back. It was completely unsalvageable. Sunny's back wasn't doing much better. Turning onto his stomach with a moan, Sunny spat a bit of blood on the stone floor and weakly raised one hand, giving the shadow saint thumbs up. Good, well done, 10 out of 10, just like crap. That really hurts, just like I expected." Casting a furtive glance at the elegant stone knight, he forced a smile out and tried to stand up. "I think I need to amend some details of the future experiments." Next, Sunny was planning to enhance the stone saint with the shadow before getting her to strike him again. However, on second thought, there were better ways to measure her power. Chapter 109, Soulmates. Picking himself up from the floor, Sunny staggered and found his way back to the fire burning under the improvised grill. Glancing at the motionless stone knight, he spat a bit more blood and groaned. As the appetizing aroma of roasting meat filled the air, the blood weave got busy repairing his body. By the time his supper was ready, Sunny was able to breathe without wincing. Putting the meat on his prized possession, the luxurious silver plate, Sunny prepared to eat. On the forgotten shore, simple everyday necessities like plates were rarer than enchanted swords and magical suits of armor. In the whole cursed city, only Gunlaug and his 5 lieutenants were able to dine with as much decorum as Sunny. Granted, he had yet to find even a single pair of chopsticks in this whole damn place, let alone something more technologically advanced, like a spoon. Of course, Sunny could try and make one himself, but that wasn't the same thing. The Shadow Saint was silently looking at him with her burning ruby eyes, feeling uncomfortable under her mysterious gaze. Sunny glanced at his plate, then at the menacing stone creature. You want some?" He raised a piece of meat and offered it to the taciturn monster. However, the stone saint showed no reaction at all. "Well, suit yourself." Using the prowling thorn as a kitchen utensil, Sunny dug in, devouring the juicy meat like a starving animal. With not a single human soul around, he didn't bother with table manners at all. That's the life. His perpetually hungry outskirt self would have been really shocked to see this extravagant feast. That was real meat. He had hunted and prepared it himself, no less. More than that, he got to enjoy a similar type of luxury food almost every day. Of course, that real meat had come from a revolting horror of a monster, but these were just small details. Chewing on the last piece with a sense of deep satisfaction, Sunny thoughtfully looked at the stone saint. It was time to continue. Earlier, He wanted to see if there was a possible synergy between the different powers that his aspect possessed, namely, if the enhancement provided by shadow control could be applied to shadows. Sunny knew that his shadow was able to enhance his body, his memories, and, with lesser effect, various inanimate objects. However, it was unable to enhance other humans and memories that belonged to them, as well as any living creature except for Sunny himself. He had secretly tested it during his travels with Nephis and Cassie to come up with this conclusion. More importantly, it couldn't affect echoes. But what about shadows? Giving a mental command, Sunny sent his shadow in the direction of the stone saint and held his breath. Flowing like water, the shadow silently grasped the statuesque monster in its dark embrace. Then, it seemed to disappear, as though absorbed by the stone flesh of the tenebrous night. A moment later, Stone Saint's ruby eyes blazed with crimson fire. Her smooth granite skin shined with dark radiance once again, smoky wisps of the ghostly gray fog oozing from beneath her stone-like armor like dancing flames. Suddenly, it felt as though the temperature in the hidden chamber dropped by a couple of degrees. Shadows around the menacing creature seemed to swell, becoming deeper and darker, like a vast mantle sewn from boundless, empty blackness. The elegant stone saint had always looked dangerous and deadly, but now she was downright fearsome. Even without having the shadow saint strike him again, Sunny could tell that the experiment ended in a resounding success. It was apparent that the two types of his shadows were practically created for each other. Her power was increased twofold, at least. A bit peeved, he looked down and sighed. Why does she look so much cooler than I do when using the shadow? Shouldn't it be the other way around? I'm the true divine shadow here, me. Where's my aura of mysterious coolness? Shaking his head, Sunny lamented his lack of good looks and simultaneously congratulated himself on becoming the master of such a stylish monster. Technically, it didn't matter how his shadows looked, just as long as they were powerful. However, he was secretly glad that his first shadow was not only powerful, but also a darkly beautiful sight to behold. Killing monsters was great, but killing monsters while looking good was even better. Wait, if she can use my shadow, what else can she use? Suddenly excited, Sunny finally swallowed the half-forgotten piece of meat and dismissed the stone saint. Then he shifted his perspective to look at the soul sea and summoned her again, this time inside it. The shadow appeared in the whirlwind of black flames and stood motionlessly upon the still waters of the silent sea. Her mysterious ruby eyes stared at him through the narrow visor of her stone helmet. Not wasting any time, Sunny looked up at the spheres of light circling around the shadow core. What if I can equip her with actual memories? What to choose, she was extremely strong and very proficient with her round shield. So wasn't it logical to assume that a tower shield would suit her even better? Coincidentally, he happened to have one of those. Sunny summoned the memory that he had gotten in one of the fights on the streets of the cursed city. It was a large, square tower shield that was almost as tall as him. The thing was too heavy and unwieldy to actually use in combat, at least not by Sunny. Plus, he wielded a tachi, which could only perform to its full potential while held in both hands. Grabbing the cumbersome shield, Sunny walked over to the Shadow Saint and handed it to her with a hopeful smile. Here, take this, please? The shadow stared at him for a few moments, then lowered her head and glanced at the tower shield. Come on. Come on, take it. His heart skipped a beat when the statuesque creature slowly raised her hands and grasped the memory with her stone gauntlets. Yes, that's right. Now use it. The stone saint obediently brought the shield to her chest, and then shattered it. Sunny froze, his mouth hanging open. Your memory has been destroyed. What? The shards of the broken memory turned into a river of tiny sparks of light, just like the echo of the carapace scavenger and the azure blade had done before, disappearing forever. My tower shield. Sunny felt a sharp dagger of sorrow stab at his heart. Yes, the shield was of no use to him, but it would sell for so much money in the real world. Why? Why did this evil thing have to break it? Why wasn't his beautiful chair enough? He gazed at the tiny sparks, wanting to cry. However, a moment later, his eyes widened. Because the river of sparks did not disappear. Instead, it circled around the stone saint's body and then suddenly flowed through it, separating into two streams. Each stream was then absorbed by one of the dark embers burning in the depths of the living shadow that was hiding inside the monster's body. Sunny blinked. Stone Saint has grown stronger. Chapter 110, Memento. Sunny stared at the Shadow Saint, dumbfounded. The storm of emotions that the destruction of the tower shield had produced was still tugging on his heartstrings. But now, an equally powerful feeling was slowly welling up in his chest. Not knowing how to process all of this, he simply blinked a couple of times and said in a flat tone, "Huh? So, let me get this straight. He gave the shield to his pet monster, hoping that she would be able to use it. And she did, sort of. It's just that, instead of wielding the memory, she ate it." Sunny hesitated for a few moments, wondering if he had finally lost it. But no. The echo of the spell's voice was still resounding above the dark waters, whispering the same phrase over and over again. Stone Saint has grown stronger. With a heavy sigh, Sunny summoned the runes and found the description of the shadow. Down at the very bottom of it, the runes were slightly changed. Shadow fragments. 2 test 800. A wild gleam appeared in his eyes. 2 fragments he had received the memory of the tower shield after slaying a particularly hardy wraith, who, despite its frightening appearance, had turned out to be merely an awakened monster. For killing it, Sunny himself had received 4 shadow fragments. But that was because his own shadow core was dormant, and as such he always got double the reward in battles against creatures of the higher rank, 2 for each soul core that an awakened creature possessed. The Stone Saint was such a creature herself, so it was logical to assume that she would not receive the same treatment. The tower shield had come from a monster with 2 awakened cores, so she received 2 fragments for consuming its memory. Which meant that, with a fire of excitement burning in his eyes, Sunny hurriedly summoned another memory. A disgusting eye with a menacing vertical pupil appeared from the dissipating brightness of the descending sphere of light. That eye came from a basilisk-like creature that Sunny had killed a few weeks ago. To survive the battle, he had to fight it with his own eyes closed, relying solely on the shadow sense to move through the rubble and dodge the attacks of the deadly beast. In the end, he had beheaded the vile thing with a slash of his swift blade seconds before being ripped apart by its claws. It was a fine test for his nascent combat skill. Sadly, the memory came with none of the powers that the actual beast had possessed. It was only capable of producing a harmless beam of red light, which could only be used for creating mood lighting, at least in the case of Sunny, who could see in the dark. Grabbing the eye, he held it out for the Stone Saint to take. The shadow grasped the disgusting thing, brought it to her chest, and then crushed it in her armored fist. Once again, the memory disintegrated into countless tiny sparks of ethereal light, which were then absorbed by the darkness hiding inside the elegant creature's body. Stone Saint has grown stronger. Sunny grinned, then threw his head back and laughed. So that's how it was. The shadows fed on memories. They consumed them to receive power, just like he killed nightmare creatures to consume the remnants of their shadows. To make sure, he glanced at the runes again and saw exactly what he had expected to see. Shadow fragments, 3 halves 200. Tier 1 awakened memory. 1 fragment. Makes sense. Giddy with anticipation, Sunny summoned the next memory. A bulky suit of rusty plate armor appeared from the sphere of light and hovered in the air in front of him. This one he had received after burning the towering nest of monstrous, flesh-devouring termites to the ground. Creating a bonfire in the absolute darkness of the Forgotten Shores night was a dangerous endeavor, but he had hoped to receive hundreds of shadow fragments by eviscerating the whole swarm of these tiny gluttonous creatures. Judging by the amount of bones littering the ground around the nest, they were a real plague. Sadly, the entire colony had turned out to be a single demonic being, landing him only 6 fragments. He even had to retreat without collecting the soul shards from the smoldering remains of the hive, scared away by the approach of several fallen horrors that had been attracted by the bright flames. The memory was of little consolation, since his own puppeteer's shroud was superior to it in all regards. But now, finally, it could be of use. The Stone Saint devoured the armor, just like she had devoured the other 2 memories, Once again, the spell announced that the shadow monster had grown stronger. The runes changed again. Shadow fragments. 6 2000 torn. Every time the numbers changed, Sonny felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His menacing stone knight was becoming more fearsome with each second. He suspected that gambling addicts felt something similar in the throes of a rare winning streak. Caught in the moment, he grasped the next memory, but then stopped and stared at the small silver bell that lay silently in his hand. This one was the first memory he had ever received, barely holding on to life in the bitter cold and terror of the first nightmare. It was the weakest memory he had, but also the most meaningful. Sonny had killed one human to receive it and had used it to kill another. The silver bell was a reminder. With bleak eyes, he read the runes that shimmered in the lightless emptiness of his soul. A small memento of a long-lost home, which once brought its owner comfort and joy. Suddenly drained of the excitement that had been consuming him just a few moments ago, Sonny sighed heavily and dismissed the memory. There was a dark expression on his face. Glancing at the motionless shadow saint, he turned away. That's enough for today. Ah, what a long day. I think I'll go to sleep now. Leaving the soul sea, he stood silently for a few minutes, then slowly walked to his bed and fell on it. Dismissing the puppeteer's shroud, Sonny wrapped himself in the blanket and closed his eyes. He was so tired. Chapter 111, Lesser Creature. Sonny woke up from the oppressive feeling that drowned the whole world. The sunset was drawing near, and with it, the abyssal shadow of the crimson spire had once again fallen on the cursed city. The distant spire could be seen from anywhere in these somber ruins, looming over the forgotten shore like an eternal dark omen. It was cyclopean and unimaginably high, with its roots growing from the endless sea of crimson coral and its peak lost somewhere beyond the veil of gray clouds. In these past few months, Sonny had gotten accustomed to its presence and learned to not pay it any attention. Thinking about the spire was a sure road to madness. After all, somewhere inside that inconceivable structure lay their only hope of ever returning home. And hope was a poison. Yawning, Sonny stood up and stretched his arms. His good mood, which he had momentarily lost for some strange reason, was already returning. Now that he had some time to put the events of the previous night into perspective, he understood even more clearly how amazing his luck had been recently. The acquisition of the Stone Saint and her following transformation into a shadow were nothing short of miraculous. His life was about to change for the better. However, Sonny had to think things through thoroughly. He was in uncharted waters in regards to how to cultivate his pet monster. The initial excitement he felt after realizing that the Shadow Saint was capable of consuming memories to collect shadow fragments was gone. In its place, there now was a series of uncomfortable questions. Sonny had spent somewhere around 6 months on the Forgotten Shore. In all this time, he had only been able to collect 3 memories that were suitable to be fed to the shadow, giving her mere 6 shadow fragments. With the current speed of progression, he would have to wait for 16 full years to see his labor bear fruit and find out what exactly was going to happen once the Stone Saint had accumulated all 200 shadow fragments that the runes demanded. Even among the elites of Gunlaug's army, there was no one who had survived on the Forgotten Shore for more than 10 years. The king of the castle himself had only been here for 8, and only lived that long in large part due to luck. Granted, Sonny's battle ability would grow dramatically once the deadly Stone Knight was added into the equation, but still, it was too long. He had to think of something. While he was doing the math, Sonny's eyes fell on the iron chest that stored his painstakingly accumulated fortune of soul shards. Distracted, he froze for a few moments, then hesitantly approached the chest and stared at its lid. By the standards of the Forgotten Shore, he was an incredibly rich man. His fortune could buy him a lot of things in the castle, from comparatively simple to increasingly rare and hard to come by. Some of the things that could be easily bought in that pit of despair, he didn't even want to think about. What interested him the most, however, was the possibility of acquiring a large amount of memories. Powerful memories with useful enchantments were not cheap. In fact, they were extremely expensive, but he didn't really care about the quality. Since Stone Saint could get the same amount of fragments from the most useless of memories, all he needed was quantity. If he were to spend all of his shards, her power would instantly leap by a considerable amount. In the future, he would be able to cultivate the shadow at double the speed, too. Half of the materials coming from the memories he would be acquiring from slaying monsters, the other from the memories he would be buying with the soul shards the monsters had left behind. That would potentially reduce the overall time frame to a somewhat sensible period. However, there was a big problem with this plan. Once Sunny began to spend a large number of soul shards, he would inevitably draw a lot of attention. Dealing with random daredevils who would try to rob him, while not pleasant, was not a big problem, but if Gunlog himself were to become interested in his exploits, that would spell disaster. And then there was Nephis, whose presence made any sort of planning futile for reasons that only she and Sunny knew. Everyone else seemed to be blind and deaf to the truth, which was the source of the problem. Sunny frowned and turned away from the chest. I might come back to this idea later. But first, I'll have to check if consuming memories is the only way for a shadow to grow stronger. He still wanted to know if the stone saint could absorb shadow fragments by slaying nightmare creatures just like he could. Sometime later, Sunny was cautiously moving through the stone maze of the Forsaken City. Able to become one with the shadows, he had a certain advantage over anyone else who would dare to explore these cursed ruins in the absolute darkness of the night. However, even he was always just one step away from death. Attracting the attention of the real masters of the streets, the fallen creatures who dwelled here from the ancient times, would be the end of him. Sunny had no illusions about that. Humans only survived here by learning how to avoid the fallen ones and seek out weaker monsters to hunt. There weren't a lot of lesser creatures who were able to secure a foothold in the cursed city, so hunting them was always dangerous. Nevertheless, that was what Sunny had made into his profession, and that was what he was doing now. Finally, he reached the area where he had observed a particular creature in the past. Surprisingly, Sunny was intimately familiar with that type of monster. After all, one of them had almost cost him his life in the past. Somewhere around this particular street, a lone carapace centurion had made its lair. Climbing atop a tall stone column, Sunny stood motionlessly in the darkness and waited for his prey to appear. Time moved excruciatingly slowly, but a good hunter had to have a lot of patience. His dark eyes pierced the veil of night, observing the ghostly ruins. 1 hour passed, then another. Sunny waited. Soon, his patience was finally rewarded. From the deep darkness of one of the toppled buildings, a familiar hulking shape appeared in all its menacing beauty. The carapace centurion stepped onto the cobblestones, his black carapace decorated with crimson patterns, 2 terrifying bone scythes scraping against the stone. Sunny smiled. The carapace centurion only had time to take a single step before 2 crimson flames suddenly ignited in the deep shadows that consumed the ruined street. Then, a graceful stone knight stepped out of the darkness. Raising her shield, she rested the blade of her sword on its rim. Wisps of ghostly gray fog were seeping from under her armor, a strange dark radiance emanating from her skin. The darkness around seemed to move, as though wanting to embrace her like a dark mantle. The 2 monsters, one massive and savage, one small and steadfast, froze opposite each other. And then, all hell broke loose. Chapter 112, Duel of the Monsters. Just like in the battle against 2 fallen beasts, the stone saint attacked first. Striking her sword against the rim of the shield twice, she dashed forward without fear or hesitation. Of course, Sunny was not sure if shadows were even capable of feeling fear. The carapace centurion reacted swiftly and savagely, lunging at her in a furious onslaught of adamantine chitin and jagged blades. In front of this towering creature, Shadow Saint looked meager and slight. The 2 monsters collided in the middle of the street, a small shockwave spreading outward from the point of their impact. Dust and small pieces of gravel were sent flying through the air. Sunny watched the battle with vigilant eyes. He suspected that these 2 nightmare creatures were somewhat equal in terms of power. The centurion was much bigger and heavier, the impenetrable carapace making it an especially deadly adversary. All carapace creatures were unnaturally tough and strong. It also had the advantage of reach and mass. The Shadow Saint was equally as resilient due to her heavy armor and stone-like nature. Despite her small frame, the graceful knight possessed a stunning amount of strength. Sunny also had to keep reminding himself that she was not actually human, and as a being made of stone, weighed much more than a human would. The disadvantage of her size was bridged by battle awareness and skill, making the outcome of the fight unpredictable. However, that was only true if he failed to account for the dark embrace of his shadow. With its reinforcement, the stone saint was unimaginably more powerful. Sunny was pretty sure that the centurion stood no chance. Meanwhile, the two monsters were entwined in a ferocious battle. The Shadow Saint withstood the onslaught of bone scythes by bashing one away with her shield and evading the other. Not losing her momentum, she brought the shield down and slammed its edge into the centurion's carapace, causing the hulking creature to stagger. The force of the impact was so grievous that it sent cracks running through the impregnable carapace. Sunny marveled at the sight, congratulating himself on the decision to not test the augmented monster's strength on himself. Using the opening that she had created, the stone saint twisted her torso and delivered a backhand blow with the boss of the shield, striking the same spot again. The already damaged chitin plate splintered, revealing the soft flesh beneath. A moment later, she was already moving to evade the fierce retaliation of the savage carapace creature. The graceful knight was miserly in her movements, dodging each strike with measured precision. Although Sunny was only a novice in the art of combat, he had learned enough to be able to recognize the hints of a distinct battle style in how the stone saint fought. Her whole technique was based in simplicity and economy of movement, each action calculated and efficient. Combining hard blocks, dodges, and deflections with grounded footwork and well-timed ripostes, the Shadow was able to create a stark contrast between defense and offense, the former being solid and indomitable, the latter abrupt and inevitable. It was very different from the flowing and unpredictable style that Nephis had used, and that he himself had been taught. Only now did Sunny realize that the basic katas and forms he had practiced were, in fact, very unique and unusual. Where did his fighting style come from? There was a lot to consider here, both in terms of how to improve his current technique and how to incorporate new elements into it. However, that was a task for the future. Right now, he was more interested in the outcome of the fight. The stone saint was already suppressing her monstrous enemy. A few of the centurion's legs were either broken or severed, streams of azure blood gashing out of the terrible wounds. However, it was still resisting furiously. But no matter how enraged it became, the silent and menacing poise of the graceful Shadow Knight was much more terrifying. Just at that moment, the Shadow Saint sidestepped a downward slash of one of the centurion's scythes and then pinned it under her greave. Using her weight to immobilize the enemy's weapon, she delivered a vicious blow with the rim of her shield and shattered the bone blade into pieces. The carapace monster screeched, dazed by the loss of its scythe, and immediately tried to eviscerate the loathsome little fiend with the remaining one. However, he was a fraction of a second too late. With one side of its body left defenseless, the stone saint now had much more space to attack. Deflecting the scythe with the shield, she dashed forward and lashed out with an upward slash, severing it near the joint. Continuing the motion, she then stepped through the rain of azure blood and mercilessly thrust her sword into the opening in the centurion's armor that had been created by her at the start of the fight. The stone blade pierced through the flesh of the monster and devastated its spine. The force of the blow was so immense that the tip of the sword broke through the chitin on the centurion's back. Pulling the sword out of the dying creature's body with one sharp motion, the Shadow Saint shook the blood off the blade. Then, she indifferently stepped back and froze, seemingly turning into a dark, motionless sculpture. Only the crimson fire still burning in her ruby eyes betrayed that the shadow was alive. Sunny held his breath, waiting for the spell to speak. Soon he heard its faintly familiar voice. "You have slain an awakened monster, Carapace Centurion. Your shadow grows stronger." Slightly disappointed, he summoned the runes and checked the number of the shadow fragments in his possession. Shadow fragments, 307 20th 1000. 93 left to 400, he thought automatically. Then, just to be sure, Sunny glanced at the description of the stone saint. Shadow fragments, 6 to 700. So just like with the echoes, The kills performed by the shadow benefited her master instead of the monster herself. It seemed as though consuming memories was truly the only way to feed the stone saint. Sunny frowned. Well, that complicates things. Chapter 113, Dark Well. After the Shadow Saint had ruthlessly eviscerated the Carapace Centurion and confirmed Sunny's suspicion that he wouldn't be able to cultivate her in that way, he was left with nothing much to do. The knight was still young, but he had already achieved his goal. Now he was free to do whatever he wished. However, there weren't very many options available in the cursed city. He could continue to hunt, reveling in the newfound power. With the stone saint at his command, Sunny would be able to bathe the ruins in monster blood. However, that thought, no matter how seductive, left him uneasy. Hunting in this hellish place required patience and preparation. He only survived this long by carefully scouting the potential battlegrounds in advance and studying his prey from the shadows to learn its strengths and weaknesses, not rushing into a fight until he was absolutely sure that there was a solid chance of victory. Shadow Saint or not, betraying these principles would still get him killed, and with his mental state, slightly unstable, Sunny didn't trust himself to stay cautious once the easy wins kept piling up. He had to proceed slowly. Looking around the quiet ruins, Sunny smiled slightly. Actually, he wasn't that far from the library. He had indeed turned hunting nightmare creatures into a sort of profession, but it was just that, a job. Like any well-adjusted young man, he also had a hobby. In his free time, Sunny liked to explore the ruins. The warm feeling of satisfaction he had experienced after finding the hidden nest of the vile thieving bird never left his memory. There was something deeply engaging in uncovering fragments of long-lost history and piecing them together. Maybe Sunny had inherited this passion from teacher Julius, or maybe it had always been slumbering deep within his heart. In any case, he enjoyed exploring the ancient city a great deal. It was full of all kinds of mysteries, both large and small. After thousands of years had passed, most traces of the past had been erased by the merciless flow of time. But by looking in the right places and exercising critical thinking, insight, and imagination, it was possible to piece together tiny shards of truth. Every time the seemingly disparate clues clicked into a coherent picture, Sunny felt a pleasant rush. Interestingly enough, it didn't matter whether that picture pertained to something important or completely useless. In fact, he enjoyed learning about the small details of the daily life that the inhabitants of the ancient city had once led much more than he enjoyed learning about the possible origins of the catastrophe that had befallen them, despite the fact that the latter was directly related to his own survival. For example, he was very curious to learn more about the young priestess whose private quarters he had made into his secret lair. The things she had left behind told him a lot about how the people of the city used to dress and think about the world, filling his imagination with colorful pictures of crowded streets and solemn cathedrals. But it was still not enough. His latest exploration project was the ruins of a grand library. Of course, none of the books and scrolls had survived the thousands of years in the cursed darkness. Luckily, the people who used to live in the city before its fall were very fond of stone engravings. He spent a lot of time studying the intact wall carvings, as well as fragments of surviving frescoes. One fresco in particular was especially grandiose and tantalizing, covering the entire floor of the library's main hall. Sadly, it was almost completely buried under rubble. Sunny had managed to clear some of it away, but most pieces of the collapsed roof were too heavy for him to lift. Maybe the Shadow Saint would have more luck. It was a suitable plan, but for some reason, Sunny felt strangely reluctant to return to the exploration of the library on that particular night. What else can I do? He jumped down from the stone column and approached the dead Carapace Centurion to carve out some meat and the soul shards. Come to think of it. The spot marked on the crude map that he had found on the body of the strange hunting party's leader was not that far away too. Maybe he could check it out. Sunny vehemently shook his head. No, the map has to be fake anyway, right? Trying to suppress the unhealthy fire of curiosity burning in his chest, Sunny concentrated on the task at hand. Once the meat and the shards were in his possession, though the persistent desire to follow the map returned. And if it's not fake, that's even worse. Who knows what kind of horror those fools were searching for? Surely there wouldn't be any treasure or important secrets hidden there. This whole thing smelled of nothing but peril. In fact, it reeked of something sinister, terrifying, and utterly evil. Sunny sighed. But honestly, what's the harm in taking one tiny look? It's just one look. What's the worst that can happen? Quietly stepping through the stone rubble, Sunny cautiously approached the spot marked on the map. For some strange reason, very few nightmare creatures seemed to choose this remote part of the city as their hunting grounds. It was as though they were compelled to avoid this place. Come to think about it, that fact alone would be enough to scare Sunny away in normal circumstances. But with the stone saint hiding in his shadow, he felt a bit braver. He would be able to run away if anything happens, at least. Approaching a large building that had been magnificent once, Sunny climbed over the collapsed wall and found himself in a dark and secluded courtyard. In the center of the courtyard, there was a well. Its round mouth loomed like an open wound in the stone, filled with nothing but empty blackness. The well was covered with a strange, ornate iron grate. It must have weighed several tons at least, as though someone desperately wanted to prevent anything from ever lifting it from its place and leaving the well open. Sunny gulped before approaching and looking through the grill of the grate. The silent well was so deep that he couldn't see its bottom. Maybe there wasn't one. Picking up a small stone, Sunny dropped it down. The black mouth of the well swallowed the stone, making it disappear. Many seconds passed, but there was no sound of the rock hitting anything. Sunny was almost ready to try again, but then the well spoke. A melodic, strangely enchanting voice resounded from its dark depths, filling Sunny's ears with sweetness. Ah, a guest. He staggered back, his eyes opening wide in fear. Quope. Not doing that. Sunny wanted to turn around and run away, but something stopped him from following his instinct. He sensed that leaving without finding out more was going to be a wrong decision, and the voice sounded so human-like. It was like the voice of someone you would want to be your friend. He shook his head, breaking free from the reverie. What were those damned fools up to? What are they doing there in that damn castle? I need to warn Nephis. No, wait, I need to find out more first. I'll try to understand what is going on here, but if there's any sign of danger, I run. Gritting his teeth, Sunny forced himself to stay still. A moment later, the well whispered, "How wonderful. I haven't been fed in a long time." Chapter 114, Voice of Darkness. The enchanting voice came from the well in a wave of whispering echoes. It was soft and charming, flowing like a smooth, silken melody. It seemed to belong to a young man if mere humans could even possess such a voice. A divine being would suit it more. Or a profane one. Sunny wasn't in the mood to appreciate the smooth and rich texture of the voice, though. He was covered in cold sweat. The echoes whispered, Time. In all his time on the forgotten shore, Sunny had only met one other creature capable of mimicking human speech. The memory of that encounter still made him tremble. The thing that had come from the depths of the dark sea in a mantle of fog and stolen Cassie's voice was by far the most terrifying being he had ever met. He didn't even want to remember the utter horror he had felt when the swarm of whispering voices had surrounded him. On that night, Sunny had only been able to keep his sanity intact because of the blind girl's timely warning. He had only survived the meeting with the creature that possessed a human voice by keeping his eyes tightly shut. And now, here was another. Why were those hunters searching for this ancient horror? He frowned. If something sinister was brewing inside the castle, he had to warn Changing Star. But he couldn't do anything before establishing at least some understanding of the entire situation. That's why Sunny forced himself to stay still despite the fact that every instinct in his body screamed for him to run away. Instinct was not always the best advisor. Humans possessed intelligence for a reason. The black fissure of the well loomed in front of him like a pool of darkness. Suddenly, he was incredibly grateful for the immensely heavy ornate grate that kept the charming talker imprisoned in the lightless depths. Sunny licked his lips and tried to regain his composure. Ready to summon the stone saint and the midnight shard at any moment, he took a step forward and gazed into the dark emptiness once again. Then, he slowly said, It's nice to meet you." He couldn't quite believe that he was trying to communicate with the terrifying prisoner of the well instead of running away without looking back. Life was sure full of surprises, until the moment it gave you the last one, of course. A soft chuckle resounded from the well. After its melodious murmur disappeared in the darkness of the secluded courtyard, the voice said, "Oh no, the pleasure is mine." The echoes whispered, "Mine, mine, mine." Sonny was considering his next words very carefully. My life might be depending on what I say next. He couldn't help but remember old fairy tales about terrible monsters that liked to play riddles with lost children. One wrong answer, and the children were devoured, never to be seen again. Was he going to end up in similar danger? It was still not too late to turn back. However, before he could ask his question, or make the decision to retreat, the thing in the well spoke again. It said, "So are you guys going to feed me or not? Not to offend anyone, but lately you've been very tardy. I have been sitting here by my lonesome for 3 days already. Or have you decided to try something new?" Sonny blinked. What? That wasn't exactly what he expected to hear from the mouth of an ancient evil. The thing sounded so human, he was almost tempted to believe that it actually was. "That's how it gets you, fool." Sonny forced himself to remain vigilant. What did he know about how primordial evils were supposed to talk anyway? If it was able to steal the knowledge of human language from his head, it would surely be able to steal some other things too. While Sonny was trying to comprehend what was happening, a few seconds flew by. The voice waited for a bit, then returned. "Oh, I see. So we are going with starvation now. Well, I have to give you guys some credit. This is your best idea yet. Sadly, it won't work. Do you even know what type of diets we trainees have to follow to debut? I guess not. Actually, I have to thank you. This is a great opportunity to work on my BMI." The echoes whispered, "BMI, BMI, BMI. Wait, what?" Sonny stared into the well, dumbfounded. His eye twitched. Don't tell me that there is really just some guy sitting on the bottom of that damn well." Feeling like the world suddenly stopped making any sense, he rubbed his temples, then asked in a strange tone, "Who are you?" The well fell silent. Sonny tried to remember what the charming voice had told him before, something about not being fed in a long time. It surely sounded ominous and creepy in the moment, but if he looked at it a bit differently, if the group of hunters he lured to their deaths had been on its way to deliver food to a prisoner, then that would explain why the poor guy had to skip a few meals. But why would they keep someone imprisoned in this remote area of the ruins? Meanwhile, the voice spoke again. This time it sounded tense. "Wait, you're not one of the... You're not... Oh gods." Sonny covered his face with his hand, realizing what was going to happen next. Oh gods. It's not a human, heavens. I'm going to die. Those damn fools finally got me killed. From the perspective of a sleeper locked inside a well in the middle of the ruins, only two types of beings could come here to find him, either his captors or nightmare creatures. Sonny revealed that he wasn't one of the captors by asking his last question, which left only one other possibility. The fact that he came to the well during the night alone and not using anything to light the way only made the conclusion easier to make. Wait, it speaks. Oh gods, I've only ever heard of one other creature on the forgotten shore that can mimic human speech. No, not like this. Damon, he really does have a nice voice. It's beautiful even when full of despair, huh? What? It's just a voice. Why am I so enamored with Was he so desperate to hear a human voice? Why? He was doing fine on his own. Great. Even. Better than ever. Focus on the task. But what exactly was the task? Sonny had never expected to find a human at the end of the crude map. What was he supposed to do now? I guess the first step would be to find out who the guy in the well is and how he got there. Then I can decide what to do with him, or if I should do anything at all. But there hid the problem first. Sonny had to convince the young man in the well that he was actually a human, too. Sonny glanced at his shadow, feeling somewhat helpless. The shadow was bent over, holding its stomach. Its shoulders were shaking. Chapter 115, Nightingale. Sunny could really understand how bad the situation looked from the perspective of the young man with a beautiful voice. The only thing that could be worse than approaching a terrifying dark well, while thinking that there's an ancient and utterly evil creature hiding inside, was to actually be locked inside that terrifying dark well, while thinking that some abominable thing was looking down on you from above. At least Sunny had a chance to escape if things were to turn really bad. The poor guy in the well literally had nowhere to run. Of course, there was still the possibility that all of this was just a cunning act performed by some incredibly horrifying monster. Sunny had to keep that in mind while exploring the other theory. So if he is indeed a human, how do I make him believe that I'm not a monster? That wasn't a very simple task for Sunny. He had never been good at communicating with people in the first place, and 3 months of complete isolation did not make things any better. In fact, they had made everything worse. Now, even Sunny sometimes felt uncomfortable when talking to himself. What would Cassie say? He cleared his throat. Are you a human? I am too. I am a human too. We are both humans. Great job, idiot. After that abhorrent attempt, Sunny wouldn't be even surprised to find out that he was not, in fact, a human who talks like that. The young man in the well grew silent. Then, he silently said, Yeah, it's definitely all over for me. Oh well, I had a good run, I guess. Sunny sighed heavily. Stop panicking, you idiot. I really am a human. The owner of the charming voice laughed. Please forgive me if I don't believe you. He was using respectful honorifics, as though recognizing Sunny as an elder, which was logical, given that he believed him to be an eldritch horror. An eldritch horror would technically count as an elder, all things considered. Sunny groaned inwardly. Why are you using honorifics? I bet I'm younger than you. The young man imprisoned in the well hesitated. Wait, you really are a human? Sunny smiled with excitement, feeling that he was making progress. Yes, I really am. The voice returned a dozen seconds later. How come you're here alone and in the middle of the night? You also don't seem to have any source of light with you. Please don't get angry, Sir Monster. But that's not exactly something a human would be able to do. Maybe you should work on your story a bit more next time you venture out to devour innocent souls. Just, a piece of friendly advice. Sunny sighed. Very funny. I'm able to walk around the city at night because my aspect allows me to hide in the darkness. I can also see through it too. How did you end up in this well anyway? The young man lingered before answering. How does one usually end up in these situations? A bunch of thugs decided to shake me down from my memories. I politely refused, and here we are. They've been keeping me here for a couple of weeks, trying all kinds of methods to get me to transfer the memories to them. But I must say, their attempts were very clumsy. In terms of knowing how to terrorize people, these fellows are not even anywhere near the laziest of sasaengs. Sunny didn't know what a sasaeng was, so he just assumed that it was some kind of a horribly malevolent nightmare creature. The rest of the story was somewhat easy to believe. Of course, it would take a very special kind of fool to choose the ruins of all places to keep a prisoner, but thugs were not known for their intelligence. Plus, their plan seemed to have worked pretty well, right, until the moment they had the misfortune of stumbling onto Sunny. Well, now he knew what this whole thing was about. Just some tiresome human business. How disappointing. Nephis and Cassie were also not in any sort of danger. At least not with regard to this mess. The mystery was solved. He had wasted a whole night on this nonsense. I see. Well, goodbye. With an annoyed sigh, Sunny turned around and began to walk away. However, the owner of the beautiful voice stopped him. Wait, are you really human? Sunny grimaced. I am. I've told you already. The young man imprisoned in the well hurriedly asked. Can you maybe get me out of here? Those guys are not coming back tonight, I think. If you help me escape, I'll make it worth your while. Sunny scratched the back of his head, then frowned. In what way? After a short pause, the charming voice returned again, this time somewhat hesitant. Well, you might not know this, but I am quite a rich person. I have a whole stash of soul shards back in the castle. Some might even say that I have a small fortune. Half of it is yours if you get me out of this pit. That's 10 shards at least. Sunny suddenly got an idea. Of course, he did not need the 10 shards that the young man was offering. The fact that he had these shards, though, that was potentially very useful. If he wanted to avoid unnecessary attention when buying memories with his hoard of soul shards, he would need a suitable proxy. A sleeper with a lot of shards of his own, one that was indebted to Sunny no less, was a perfect candidate. He smiled. "Do people know that you have a fortune?" The young man answered, a bit of surprise in his voice. "Do they know?" "Yeah, I guess they do. I am known to spend a lot from time to time, on entertainment, as well as, some other things. I'm a patron of arts, one can say." Perfect. So no one would be surprised if he suddenly begins to spend shards on memories. However, there was a small problem. Sunny could remove the grate, but he had no way of helping the poor guy climb out of that unimaginably deep well. Even if he was to use the prowling thorn, he doubted that the invisible string would reach that far. Its maximum length was not that impressive. And he certainly was not going to climb into the creepy well himself. Plus, he still held a bit of suspicion about the charming young man's identity. He was almost certain that he was human, but the remaining tiny bit of doubt was enough to make his paranoia ring the alarm. After hesitating for a bit, Sunny said, "What's your name?" The melodic voice answered, "It's Kai." Sunny sighed. "Well, Kai, I don't know how to tell you this, but unless you can fly, I won't be able to help you escape." The young man grew quiet. After a long pause permeated with deathly silence, he then said in a strange tone, "I can." Sunny blinked. What? Did he hear wrong? No, that was unlikely. Maybe Kai was just willing to say anything in his desperation to escape. The prisoner of the well chuckled. "I can fly. That's my aspect ability." Chapter 116. Deal with the Devil. Sunny considered Kai's words. An ability that allowed the awakened to fly was not unheard of, but it was rather rare. And here on the forgotten shore, where a cursed flood of darkness devoured the world every night, it was nothing short of priceless. Sunny couldn't even imagine how easier it would have been to traverse the labyrinth with someone like Kai by his side. Suddenly, it made a lot more sense why someone like him would possess a small fortune of soul shards. It also explained why his captors were so gentle in their attempts to force the memories out of the young man. He was much more valuable alive. Sunny remained motionless for some time, thinking things over. After a while, Kai spoke again, his pleasant voice tinted with a bit of apprehension. "Well, will you help me?" Sunny sighed and walked back to the dark fissure of the well. "All right, I'll remove this grate, and you can fly out. However, I don't really need your shards. If you want to come out of there alive, you'll have to do something for me instead." The prisoner of the well hesitated, then cautiously asked, "What?" Sunny smiled. "I'll tell you when you need to know. Don't worry, it's nothing serious. I just need help completing a few errands inside the castle. So, do we have a deal or not? If not, I'll be on my way. I've wasted enough time here already." Kai didn't have to think about it too long. Soon his voice resounded from the darkness once again. "We have a deal." It sounded strangely relaxed, as though the young man had become resigned to fate. Sunny slightly frowned and said, "Great. One more thing. If you break our agreement and simply fly away, I will find and kill you. This is not a threat, just facts. Do you understand?" Kai lingered for a bit before answering, "Yeah, no problem." Sunny gazed into the black cavern of the well and hesitated. He was more or less sure that Kai was human, but had to be prepared to act immediately in case he was not. Following his silent command, the stone saint came out of the shadows and kneeled near the well, grasping the grate with her hands. The steel of her gauntlets scraped against the ornate iron, and with some visible effort, she slowly moved the heavy grate to the side. Sunny shivered as he listened to the wrenching sound of iron grinding against stone. The midnight shard appeared in his hands, and he lowered himself into a combat stance with grim resolve. Whatever came out of the well, he was ready to face it. A few seconds passed, each feeling like an eternity. Sunny was tensely staring into the circle of pure darkness in front of him, waiting to see if he was right to trust the prisoner of the well or not. Then, several more seconds passed, and then a few more. Nothing happened. Sunny tilted his head, then asked with some irritation, "Aren't you going to come up?" After a bit of a delay, The charming voice resounded from the darkness once more. You see, I just thought of something. Sunny sighed and lowered his sword a little. What is it? Kai was silent for some time, then answered with a bit of wariness. Ah, it's just that this grate is so heavy that it wouldn't even budge when I tried to move it. It took all 6 of my captors to put it in place, actually, and they were all big, strong men. So, he hesitated. I know that we have already established that we are both human, and it's not that I doubt your honesty, but would you mind explaining to me how is it that you were able to remove it all by yourself? The honorifics were back. Sonny cursed under his breath. This guy was even more paranoid than him. He was unwilling to reveal his hidden ace to Kai, but the cautious prisoner left him with no other choice. Glancing at the Shadow Saint with a dark expression, Sonny said, That thing is too heavy for me, too. But I was lucky enough to get a very strong echo. Kai seemed to suddenly become very curious. Oh, that is indeed lucky. Very few people in the castle have an echo. I think I know every one of them by name. After a short pause, he added, By the way, what is your name? Sonny rolled his eyes and said through gritted teeth, My name is Sunless. This conversation was entering dangerous waters. Depending on what Kai was going to say next, Sonny might be forced to climb into the well after all. Not to save the young man with a beautiful voice, but to silence him forever. Meanwhile, Kai suddenly laughed. Sunless? That name does not sound like something only a soul-devouring demon would be called at all. Zero chance of that, right? After saying that, he laughed again, this time with a hint of desperation in his voice. However, even then, Kai's laugh was very pleasant to the ear. More pleasant than his charming voice even, but Sonny was in no mood to appreciate its melodious sound. God damn it, Sonny rubbed his temples. Why didn't anyone ever trust him? He was such an honest young man. The most honest young man in the world, really. Annoyed, he said in a flat tone. Very funny. Now come out of that well before I change my mind. Eventually, Kai stopped laughing and said, There's no one in the castle with that name, at least no one with an echo under their command. Do you maybe live in the outer settlement? Oh, come on. Feeling the pressure of the flaw growing in his mind, Sonny closed his eyes and answered truthfully, No. Kai cleared his throat. So you are someone who walks the cursed ruins alone at night, possesses the strength of at least 6 men, dwells in the darkness beyond the castle walls, and calls himself Sunless. Did I miss anything? Sonny grimaced. Not really. For a few moments there was silence. Then, the prisoner of the well said with a voice full of dark humor, Would you climb out of this well to meet a creature like that? Hidden in the darkness of the cursed night. Sonny smiled with a bit of menace and said, If I was in your shoes, I would, and I think that you should do it too. Do you know why? After a small pause, Kai asked with sincere interest, Why? Sonny stopped smiling and allowed a cold indifference to seep into his voice. Because I can put that grate back any time. Without waiting for Kai's response, he ordered the stone saint to move the grate a little. A moment later, the horrid sound of iron scraping against stones invaded his ears once again. Almost immediately, the prisoner of the well changed his tune. All right, wait, stop. The Shadow Saint released the grate, allowing silence to reign over the lonesome courtyard once again. Kai was quiet for some time, and then said with dejected reluctance, You'd better not be a demon, all right? Stand clear, I'm coming out. Chapter 117, Cruel Injustice. Sonny felt a soft breeze lightly caress his cheeks, and then something moved in the darkness of the well. Gripping the hilt of the midnight shard tightly, he prepared for the worst. On the other side of the dark fissure, Shadow Saint slowly raised her shield and rested the blade of her sword on its rim. However, they had nothing to fear. A few moments later, a graceful figure appeared in the air, rose above the well, and then gently landed on the stones in front of it. The corner of Sonny's mouth twitched. The owner of the charming voice was, indeed, human. It was a young man wearing a light lamellar armor, with luscious dark auburn hair and mesmerizing green eyes. His well-fitted armor was made out of burnished brown leather, with deep blue embroidered garments beneath. However, for a moment he wished that Kai actually turned out to be a demon, because the damn guy not only possessed the most charming voice he had ever heard, but was also drop-dead gorgeous. Honestly, it was simply unfair. Kai was tall, slender, and incredibly handsome. His face was small, perfectly shaped and beautiful, with high cheekbones and flawless ivory skin. His green eyes were nothing short of electric, and his lips were soft and full like a… What am I thinking? What's more, he seemed to possess that special type of warm charm that made some people almost irresistibly attractive. Sunny wouldn't be surprised to find out that droves of girls simply fell to Kai's feet every time he happened to casually walk by. Perhaps a few guys, too. Even worse still, the bastard looked like a genuinely nice person, without the smallest trace of arrogance or entitlement on his pretty face. There were playful sparks of humor hiding deep within his eyes, and one could be absolutely sure that when Kai smiled, cute dimples would appear on his cheeks. You couldn't even hate the damn guy. 2 weeks spent in the deep, dark pit did nothing to lessen his glamour, too. In short, Kai was the most beautiful person Sunny had ever seen, even compared to other awakened. He looked like one of those screen idols that people loved to obsess over, only somehow even more attractive in person. Sunny glanced at himself, feeling a strong desire to grind his teeth in outrage. Well, this is just a cruel injustice, simple as that. Meanwhile, Kai noticed the Shadow Saint's burning ruby eyes, which were the only source of light in the absolute darkness of the night, and flinched back with a paled expression on his face. Oh no, it's a demon after all. Sunny got distracted from his self-pity and blinked. Then, feeling somewhat spiteful, he said, "I'm behind you, idiot." Kai froze, then slowly turned around to face him. Sunny didn't fail to notice that the young man held one of his hands out, obviously ready to summon whatever memory he used as a weapon. Blinded by darkness, Kai couldn't see him, of course. Well, good. Let's not let this fellow know that I'm not as, good-looking as he is for a few more moments. Pretending to be perfectly composed, Sunny asked in a calm voice, "Haven't I told you that I had an echo? It's her over there?" "Well, sort of. That is to say, those aren't my eyes." The handsome sleeper hesitated for a few seconds, then said, "Sunless, you really are a human?" Up until that moment, both of them were just disembodied voices to each other. But now, while Sunny had already made sure that Kai was not some ancient horror, or at least didn't look like one the former prisoner of the well was still in the dark, both literally and figuratively. "Last time I checked, I was still human, yes. If you have a memory to produce light, you can summon it and see for yourself." Kai lingered. Won't the nightmare creatures be attracted by the light? Smart and cautious. I like him. Sunny shook his head. Usually they would. By this courtyard is really secluded. Plus, there are not a lot of monsters in this area. I guess that's why those thugs chose this particular place to keep you imprisoned. With a sigh of relief, Kai summoned a paper lantern that glowed with soft yellow light. Sunny hissed, "Arg. Damn." Relying on shadow sense to keep track of the young man's movements, he raised a hand and covered his eyes. Accustomed to the darkness, they weren't ready for such a sudden appearance of light. Of course, Sunny knew that this would happen. He allowed himself to be momentarily blinded to give Kai some sense of safety and better convince him of his human nature. "Oh, sorry." The beautiful young man lowered the lantern a little and looked up, trying to finally lay eyes on his mysterious liberator. Then, with a bit of surprise, he slightly lowered his head and looked down. "Great. That is not humiliating at all." Kai stared at Sunny for a few seconds, and after realizing that he was indeed a human, offered him a dazzling smile. His smile was as charming as the rest of him. Even the cute dimples that Sunny had imagined would inevitably appear on his cheeks were, indeed, there in all their glory. It was nothing short of obnoxious. "Well, what a surprise. I was almost certain that you will turn out to be a terrible monster. But you aren't. You really are a human, and such a cutie too." Sunny coughed. "What? Did he just call me a cutie? How dare he?" Thanks? What is happening?" Meanwhile, Kai frowned. "But Sunless." "What?" The beautiful sleeper blinked a couple of times. Can I ask something? If you really don't live in the castle or in the outer settlement, then where do you live? Sunny shrugged. I mean, are there many options left? I live in the city. Kai hesitated for a bit, but then suddenly, a light of realization ignited in his mesmerizing green eyes. Oh, I think I've heard of you. Aren't you that crazy kid that lives alone in the ruins? Sunny stared at him with murder in his eyes. Why does everyone keep calling me kid? Why does everyone keep calling me crazy? I'm not crazy. With a deep sigh, he answered, Indeed, that's me. You can call me Sunny, by the way. Once you get to know me better, you'll realize that I am not, in fact, that crazy. Kai looked at him with doubt, noticing that Sunny grinned. He decided to tease the obnoxiously gorgeous young man a little. Of course, with the limitations of his flaw, that was going to require a bit of finesse. Putting too much enthusiasm in his voice, Sunny said, And I don't actually live alone. I have plenty of creatures to keep me company. You might even call them my friends. There's a talking rock that sometimes tells me to do stuff. There's also my shadow. It has a lot of interesting opinions. He stared at Kai with a sincere smile. When the young man's handsome face became a little pale, Sunny laughed. Gee, relax, man. I'm just joking around with you. Then he looked down at the shadow and added in a dark, angry tone, They're not really my friends. I actually can't stand that rock, and the shadow and I barely talk these days. Chapter 118, Mirror Image. Perhaps joking around with Kai was a bit cruel, but Sunny was really annoyed by how ridiculously good-looking the other sleeper was. Plus, he had not talked to another human in such a long time that his already lacking communication skills had become truly rusty. Since they were going to visit the castle soon, Sunny had to prepare himself for the inevitable moment when he would be forced to talk to strangers. Stretching his flaw to its limits was a good practice. He wouldn't want for something like that accident to happen again. The unpleasant memory soured Sunny's mood. Meanwhile, Kai was staring at him with a very strange expression on his face. Sunny cleared his throat. That was a part of the joke, by the way. The handsome young man continued to stare, his face full of doubt. Did I go too hard on this poor guy? He must have been scared out of his wits already. He's probably in an utter panic now. Who wouldn't be a bit apprehensive about meeting a madman? Yeah, maybe it wasn't as funny as I thought. Kai cautiously shook his head. It's not that. I just feel like I have to inform you about something. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Yeah, about what? Kai hesitated, then said in a very calming tone, It's about my flaw. I can actually tell when someone is lying to me. So, when you said that there's a rock that tells you what to do, I knew that it was true right away. Sunny glared at the beautiful young man with an incredulous expression. Internally, he didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Flaw? How is that a flaw? That's a damn superpower, you despicable bastard. Why was that Kai so lucky? He had the charming voice, the tall stature, the perfect face. Even his flaw was a damn blessing. Coincidentally, it was also a perfect counter to the better half of Sunny's tricks. If Kai had not informed him about this strange flaw of his, Sunny would have gotten himself into really big trouble pretty soon. Luckily, the beautiful young man happened to be a very honest guy. What an angel. While Sunny was seething in outrage, Kai said in a gentle tone, So Sunny, what exactly does that rock ask you to do? Do you maybe want to tell me? Sunny sighed. I'll have to be really careful and watch what I say around this guy. Well, you're no fun at all. The talking rock is actually a memory capable of repeating words. I use it as an alarm occasionally, so it mainly tells me to wake up. As for that stuff I told about my shadow being opinionated, that's also true. But you already know, I suppose. My shadow has a bit of personality due to its function within my aspect. Kai thought about it, then smiled. Oh, I see, so it was really a joke. Very crafty. Sorry to ruin it with my flaw. Sunny scowled. Don't you patronize me? Then he stopped, thought about something, and said angrily, Wait. If you can tell when someone is lying, then why did I have to spend half an hour convincing you to get out of that well? Kai blinked a couple of times, looking innocent and hurt. Well, how do I know if my flaw works on nightmare creatures? I've never had a conversation with one before. A person can never be too careful when making deals with ancient horrors, you know. Sonny covered his face with a hand. Yeah, I know. Kai looked at him with concern. Ah, Sonny, are you all right? This is those cursed strings of fate screwing with me again. What are the odds of meeting a person whose flaw is almost the exact opposite of mine? And why is he so goddamn stunning? Is that supposed to be the opposite of how I look, huh? Huh? I am. Anyway, let's get down to business. Kai sighed. Of course. A promise is a promise. I will help you do whatever it is you want to do in the castle. Shall we go together? Sonny shook his head. Not yet. I'll have to stop by a place first. Do you know the big ruined cathedral to the south of here? The other sleeper thought for a bit, then nodded. I think I do. I fly over that part of the city often, and it's hard to miss. Are you taking me there? Good question. On one hand, Sonny didn't want anyone to know where he lived. On the other hand, he didn't trust Kai enough to simply let him return to the castle and wait there. But moving through the city with a source of light was not something he was prepared to do either. Was there a compromise? I can't take you anywhere with that lantern of yours. I survive by hiding in the darkness, remember? So you can go on and fly to the cathedral on your own. Wait for me on the roof. Kai looked south, remembering the location of the ruined temple, and nodded. All right. Sonny raised a hand, stopping the young man from flying away. Wait, whatever happens, don't go inside the cathedral, okay? I'm not joking. There's a fallen devil residing inside, so if you do, he'll butcher you just like he had butchered that bunch of idiots who had kidnapped you. Kai stared at him in shock. What? They are dead. Sonny shrugged. How do you think I found you in that well? One of the dead thugs had a map on his body. I thought there'll be treasure hidden in the marked location, but the beautiful sleeper smiled. But it was something much better? Aw, thank you for the compliment. I'll be careful not to enter the cathedral, rest assured. Sonny stared at the smiling Kai for some time, then shrugged in exasperation. Sure, off you go then. And remember, if you break our agreement, I will. Find and kill me. Yeah, don't worry, Sonny. I never break a promise. With these words, Kai raised his head and looked up. A soft gust of wind touched Sonny's skin, and in the next moment, the charming sleeper suddenly soared above the ground, quickly disappearing into the sky. Soon, only a tiny dot of his paper lantern could be seen, moving south through the black skies like a lonely star. Suddenly, Sonny trembled. A cold feeling of dread grasped his heart like an iron grip. Following the dot of light with his eyes, he whispered. There was a lonely star burning in the black skies, and under its light the castle was suddenly consumed by fire, with rivers of blood flowing down its halls. He stood for a while in the darkness, motionless. If Sonny didn't know better, he would have thought that this part of Cassie's prophecy talked about Kai. But he did know better. He had known the truth of that prophecy for some time now. Lowering his head, Sonny licked his lips and asked the voiceless shadow in a raspy voice, Is it already starting? Like always, the shadow did not answer. What a stupid question. Of course not. It had started a long time ago, right at the moment when the three of them had entered the ruined city. Chapter 119, A Fistful of Soul Shards. It took Sonny some time to find his way back to the cathedral. With the approach of the dawn, the nightmare creatures that hunted at night grew restless. He had to be especially careful as he lurked through the narrow streets, keeping to the darkest patches of shadow. Even though there was no moon or stars in the lightless night of the forgotten shore, many of the monsters here had their own ways of perceiving shapes moving through the darkness. Their ability to see in the dark was somewhat offset by Sonny's Child of Shadows attribute, which allowed him to become indistinguishable from any shadow that he dove in. However, he still had to be cautious. In this cursed place, nothing was ever certain, except for danger, death, and terror. Sometime later, he climbed the familiar pillars of the cathedral and appeared on its vast roof. Walking on the wide ridge separating two slanting expanses of ancient tiles, he approached Kai, who was standing nervously some distance away. The beautiful young man was grasping a longbow made of horn in his hands, staring into the darkness with a tense expression on his pale face. Sunny stopped a few steps away from him and looked at that bow for a long time. There's not much time left. To avoid getting an arrow between his eyes, Sunny decided to announce his arrival with a gentle greeting. "Hey Kai, I'm here." The archer turned around with a startled expression and raised a hand, as though trying to summon his lantern. However, he thought better of it, afraid to attract unwanted attention. Instead, Kai gulped and whispered, "Lower your voice. What if that fallen devil hears us?" Sunny blinked. Oh, right, he's a very careful person, which was a great personality trait to have as far as he was concerned. The more paranoid, the better. Smiling inwardly, he said, "Relax, he won't." Kai stared at him with doubt, then asked, "Are you sure?" Sunny gave him a nod. Yes. He was prepared to explain the reason behind this confidence, but, surprisingly, Kai immediately believed him and calmed down. Right, he knows when people are lying to him, which means that he also knows when they're telling the truth, and since I can only tell the truth, he can pretty much believe everything I say without the need to ask unnecessary questions. Huh, come to think of it. That flaw of his was actually very convenient. Meanwhile, Kai cautiously looked around and asked, "So, what are we going to do here?" Sunny gestured at the group of shattered tiles not too far away from them and answered in a calm tone, "I'm going to climb into that hole and retrieve something from the temple. You just wait here until I return." Kai's eyes widened. "Are you crazy? What about the devil? What about that bastard?" Sunny couldn't help but fantasize about slaughtering the damn creature for a few seconds. The day will come. Returning to the present situation, he said, "What about him? I told you, I'm good at hiding. As long as I know who I'm dealing with, they won't be able to notice me unless I want them to." He had learned that first part of the sentence the hard way. Actually, it was the bastard who taught him that even concealment of shadows had its limits. That's how Sunny ended up with his insides on his outside and in possession of this vital piece of information. Some lessons you only needed to receive once, to remember them forever. Kai was looking at him with a strange expression again. Sunny frowned. "What?" The beautiful young man shook his head. No, it's just that it's an awesome ability. I wish I had an ability like that, to be honest." Sunny glared at him and uttered through gritted teeth, "Says the guy who can fly. Why would you want to hide your perfectly symmetrical face anyway? Tired of being ogled by love-stricken supermodels?" Kai sighed. "Something like that? How did you know?" Sunny opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Anyway, wait for me here. I won't be long." Throwing a glance at the charming sleeper, he shook his head and walked over to the hole hidden behind several broken tiles. Soon, he was back in his secret lair. Looking around with a bit of apprehension, Sunny sighed and removed the rucksack fashioned from the skin of a monster from his back. Then, he unloaded the strips of Carapace Centurion's meat on the silver plate and walked over to the iron chest. To be honest, he really didn't want to go anywhere near the castle. The idea alone made him long to stay in this dark, quiet, familiar room forever. But he couldn't. If he wanted to make the Shadow Saint stronger, he had to return to the human settlement and risk facing his fears. Whatever, I'll just go in and out. Kai will be the one doing all the work anyway. With a heavy sigh, he raised the lid of the chest and began loading his rucksack with soul shards. Dozens of beautiful crystals were soon glittering inside. Sunny only took half of them, but the amount was already enough to drive many people to murder. He couldn't really blame them on the Forgotten Shore. Shards represented money, and money represented life. Without it, you couldn't buy yourself a place within the safety of the castle or procure food without having to risk death in the cursed maze of the city. Anyone would be willing to commit murder in order to survive. Keep telling yourself this. With an angry grimace, Sunny shut the rucksack tightly, made sure that no light seeped through its seams, and turned around. Glancing at his peaceful hidden lair one last time, he shut his eyes for a moment and then walked away without looking back. It was time to return to the castle, and all the terrible memories he had left there before running away. Chapter 120, Approaching the Castle. Washed in the ghostly light of the nascent dawn, Sunny and Kai were walking through the ruins of the cursed city. The night was slowly crawling away, Its retreat made one of them feel safer, while the other one grew uneasy without the familiar veil of darkness hiding him from the world. I have almost forgotten how mournful this place looks when the sun is up. Somewhere in the distance, the waves of the dark sea were halting their eternal assault on the stone walls of the ancient city. These walls had withstood thousands of years of wear and abuse without allowing even a single drop of black water to seep through. Sonny suspected that they would stand unbroken for 1,000 years more. Suddenly uncomfortable, he turned his head west and found the distant silhouette of the crimson spire. The menacing structure was looming over the forgotten shore like an evil omen, spelling doom to anyone who would dare approach it. Maybe not. Sonny had chosen a complicated and meandering route to reach the castle. Kai, who was less familiar with the cursed city, simply followed behind. The charming young man was alert and collected, his bow ready to send arrows flying at any moment. They had to circle around many areas where especially terrifying creatures were known to dwell and hunt, making slow progress. Still, it was better to be safe than sorry. At some point, Sonny raised his hand, gesturing for his companion to stop. He peered into the distance with a deep frown on his face. Kai glanced at him and whispered, "What is it?" Sonny brought a finger to his lips before answering, "Shh. Listen." Soon they heard an eerie sound that resembled stifled, heart-wrenching weeping. It was as though there was a crying woman in the fog ahead of them, slowly drawing closer. Her trembling sobs made both sleepers shiver. Kai looked at him and asked, without much confidence, "What are the chances that it's actually a human girl?" Sonny gave him a crooked smile. Low. Without needing to discuss it, they hid behind a large pile of rubble and waited. Pressing himself against the cold stones, Sonny sent his shadow to climb the building and observe the surrounding streets. Kai saw the shadow off with a bewildered look, blinked a couple of times, but didn't say anything. A minute or two later, Sonny glanced at him and asked, "Where are your arrows?" The charming young man hesitated, then said, "I usually carry a quiver with a few dozen arrows that were specially crafted for me by one of the best blacksmiths in the castle. But the gentlemen who put me in that well, may they rest in peace, weren't kind enough to let me bring it." Sonny gave him an amused look. "So that bow of yours is actually useless." Kai lingered for a few moments before answering. "I also have arrow-type memories." "How many?" The elegant archer lowered his gaze in embarrassment. 2. Will that be enough?" Sonny was silent for a bit, and then answered in a flat tone, "No. I don't think that will be enough." Out there in the fog, his shadow was looking at the creature that had been producing the heart-wrenching weeping. It was not a human girl. A massive, four-legged beast was walking through the morning mist. Its flesh was rotten and emaciated, hanging from the bones like a tattered coat. Sonny could clearly see the white arcs of its ribs through the holes in the rotting hide, the unnatural darkness hiding behind them, and the powerful jaws of the partially bared dog-like skull that were full of terrifying teeth. One didn't have to be a genius to understand that the horrid creature was one of the fallen masters of the ruined city. As he was looking, the beast opened its maw and produced another long, human-like sob, then stopped and listened as though waiting for an answer. When nothing happened, it lowered its head and slowly continued on its way. Luckily, although their hiding spot was somewhat close, it wasn't actually on its path. If nothing changed, the fallen would walk past without even noticing them. They just had to wait. Sonny sighed. "We'll have to stay here for 10 minutes, at least. Get comfortable." Once again, Kai didn't ask anything, simply taking Sonny's word for it. It seemed as though his strange ability to sense lies made the charming sleeper less prone to having a lot of questions, which was a wonderful quality to have as far as Sonny was concerned. With nothing to do but wait, they had a bit of time to rest and catch their breaths. Sonny summoned the endless spring and took a few sips of cold, sweet water. Noticing that Kai was staring at him, he hesitated, then passed him the beautiful glass bottle. The charming young man drank greedily, as though someone dying from thirst. "Come to think of it," feeling a little guilty, Sonny asked, "when was the last time they gave you water?" Kai detached himself from the bottle, wiped his lips, and smiled in pure delight. 2 or 3 days ago, I think. Thank you kindly. He returned the bottle and looked at Sunny with curiosity. Hey, Sunny, can I ask you something? Sunny tensed up and gave the charming archer a dark look. You can. His eyes, however, hinted that he shouldn't, but Kai either didn't notice the menacing glare or wasn't bothered by it. You came to the Forgotten Shore this last solstice, right? Yeah. Sunny held his breath, guessing what the beautiful sleeper was going to ask him, how they had survived in the labyrinth, why he had abandoned the castle, how he had survived in the ruins. Each of these questions could potentially lead to a disaster. Kai leaned forward with excitement in his eyes, hesitated for a second, and then said, What? What's the top music video in the charts out there right now? Sunny blinked. What? That was absolutely not what he had expected to hear. Noticing that the charming young man was staring at him with anticipation, he shifted and answered with a bit of uncertainty. I have no idea. Kai sighed, clearly disappointed, but then suddenly smiled again. The smile was wide and dazzling. Can I ask you another question? Chapter 121, Graveyard of Hope. In the next 10 minutes, the foundations of Sunny's worldview were shaken to the core. Kai had drowned him in a torrent of questions, all of which had nothing to do with anything even remotely important. What interested the charming sleeper were very strange things like what types of shoes were in fashion, which celebrity wore what to some pompous award ceremony, who of them had a scandal and what was that scandal about, what was the latest dance craze, and so on. He was endlessly curious about that type of stupid crap and absolutely indifferent about all of Sunny's dark secrets. It was almost insulting. What's worse, Sunny felt like a complete fool because he couldn't provide even a single answer. What did he know about fashion and high culture? Nothing. After a while, Kai's enthusiasm had waned. Looking at Sunny with a comically disheartened face, he sighed and gently asked one last question. Sunny, tell me honestly, were you a hikikomori in the real world as well? Sunny blinked. What is this fool talking about? A what? Kai cleared his throat and offered him an apologetic smile. A recluse? A shut-in. Someone who lives under a rock? Sunny stared at the gorgeous young man, feeling like the world completely stopped making any sense ever since they had met. What are you talking about? Why would I live under a rock? You would freeze to death. I lived in a cargo container once, but it had 4 walls and a roof at least. Kai sighed one more time and turned away. I see. Well, sorry to bother you. It's just that I've been stuck in this place for about 2.5 years now, and life here is so monotone. His beautiful profile was radiating melancholy and sadness, as though Kai was lamenting something serious, as opposed to utter rubbish. 2.5 years, that dimwit survived here for 2.5 years? Sunny was surprised to hear that. Kai seemed like a nice guy, but not exactly someone well-suited for the ruthless nightmare of the Forgotten Shore. Perhaps he had underestimated the charming sleeper, or perhaps there was another, much simpler reason. Sunny frowned. There was a group of people who tended to live here the longest. Suddenly suspicious, he asked in a cold tone, Are you a part of Gunlog's gang? Kai looked at him with surprise. Then, he chortled. Gods no, if there's one thing I absolutely despise, it's bullies like him. I would rather die than become one of Gunlog's minions. Plus, the man has no style. That armor of his is the most hideous thing I have ever seen. However, after saying that, he suddenly grew quiet and added, after a few seconds in a dejected voice, But I do accept jobs from his lieutenants from time to time. That is the reason why he tolerates my existence, so I don't really have a choice. Sunny hesitated for a bit, but then decided that he believed the other sleeper. He really didn't look like one of Gunlog's thugs. Besides, if he had been one of them, no sane person would have dared to kidnap and imprison him. Members of Gunlog's cohort were nearly untouchable, which meant that Kai was, indeed, much more capable than Sunny had given him credit for. Interesting. Noticing that the eerie sobs of the fallen beast had grown sufficiently distant, he shifted his perspective to the shadow and made sure that the terrible creature was already far away. Standing up, Sunny dismissed the glass bottle and said, We're safe now. Time to move. Once they were ready to leave, he summoned the shadow back and prepared to take the first step forward. However, then Sunny suddenly stopped and glanced at the charming young archer with hesitation. "Hey, Kai, can I ask you a question as well?" The older sleeper smiled, honesty and eagerness written all over his face. "Of course." Sunny was silent for a couple of seconds, then said in a strange voice, "That armor of yours, do you wear it because it's the best one you could get, or because it looks good?" Kai looked at him with confusion. Raising one exquisite eyebrow, he said, "I don't understand the question. Is there a difference?" Sunny closed his eyes, sighed, and turned away. "Never mind, let's go." As the sun rose above the horizon, they went deeper into the city, slowly approaching its center. The castle stood on a tall hill in the middle of the cursed city. It was grand and magnificent, with dozens of towers rising into the air, each supported by a number of elaborate arches and columns. Grotesque gargoyles were staring down on the ruins from under the eaves. The road leading to the castle was as impressive as the castle itself. It was narrow and heavily fortified, circling the hill in a way that allowed the defenders of the castle to endlessly rain arrows down on any possible attacker. At the end of the road, a grandiose staircase led to the gates of the castle. In front of it, there had once been a vast stone platform, meant to serve as the gathering ground for the soldiers in case the enemy was to somehow breach all but this one last line of defense. Now, the platform had turned into a makeshift settlement, with small shabby buildings made out of stone, wood, and anything else the inhabitants of this slum could get their hands on standing chaotically here and there, forming messy groups and narrow alleys. This place did not look like the outskirts where Sunny had grown up, but it had the same unmistakable air of misery, fear, and desperation. As the two of them approached the outer settlement, several sleepers greeted Kai with friendly smiles. "Hey, Knight. Glad to see you, man. Where have you been lately?" Kai smiled in embarrassment. Flying around. What about you, pal?" While the charming young man was exchanging pleasantries with his acquaintance, Sunny cautiously looked around. The place had imperceptibly changed since the last time he was here. The settlement itself seemed to be almost the same, with just a few buildings slightly changing shapes. The people somehow seemed more energized and confident, as though the ever-present fear of death and starvation was not as pressing anymore. However, there was a strange sense of tension in the air. I guess she was busy in these 3 months too. Finally managing to end the conversation, Kai turned to him and smiled apologetically. "Sorry about that." Sunny frowned. "Why are they calling you Knight?" The charming young man stared at him, then cleared his throat and said with a bit of strangeness in his voice, "Oh, you really don't know? Well, it's a nickname of sorts. Nightingale. That's how I am known around these parts." What a stupid nickname, Sunny thought, and decided to get things done as quickly as possible. He couldn't wait to leave this depressing place. "All right, since we're here, time to make good on your promise." Kai gave him a nod. "Sure. What do you need me to do?" Sunny looked around, making sure that no one could hear them, and said, "It's simple. Go into the castle and find out about who is selling memories and what the price is. Then come back and report to me." His companion blinked a couple of times, clearly surprised, then shrugged. "No problem. But it's going to take a while. If you want the best information possible, of course." Sunny grimaced. "Do as you see fit. I'll be waiting for you in that alley over there." Kai looked at him one last time, smiled, and walked away. Feeling nervous and tense, Sunny walked over to a secluded alley and rested his back against the wall. He tried to become as small and unnoticeable as possible. Being here was making his skin crawl. Maybe his decision to come back was a mistake. After all, maybe he should simply turn around and walk away. However, he didn't. Deep down inside, he knew that he had to take this opportunity to gather as many memories as possible so that his shadow could become stronger as fast as possible. Perhaps he would never get this opportunity again. Time slowly passed. An hour went by, then another. Kai was certainly taking his sweet time gathering the information Sunny had asked from him. However, nothing bad had happened yet. Sunny was almost starting to believe that he was nervous for nothing. But then, of course, the thing he dreaded the most became a reality. A calm, painfully familiar voice suddenly resounded from somewhere behind him. "Hi, Sonny." He froze, feeling like a beast caught in a trap, and then slowly turned around. A strange, complicated expression appeared on his face. Forcing out a smile, Sonny licked his suddenly dry lips and said, "Hey, Neff, long time no see." Chapter 122. 4 months ago. Nephis changed a lot since the last time Sonny had seen her. Outwardly, she looked almost the same, tall, firm, and strangely distant, as though existing slightly apart from the rest of the world. She was still wearing the Starlight Legion armor, which accentuated the graceful lines of her slender, lithe body. Only now, there was also a white cloak draped over her shoulders, close in color to the pristine metal of the elegant plate armor. Changing Star's silver hair was much longer now, almost reaching her shoulders. Without the short tomboyish cut, she looked strangely mature and feminine, making Sonny's heart beat a little faster. Her calm gray eyes were as striking as ever. The true changes, however, hid much deeper. Perhaps only a person who knew her as well as Sonny did could notice them. Or perhaps it was precisely because he had come to know her so well that the veil of detached indifference shrouding her true self cracked, revealing the deeper feelings beneath. Nephis seemed to be much more alive now, much more present. Her eyes shined with resolve and determination, radiating an almost infectious feeling of temperate confidence. This was her power, the power of conviction. Sonny shivered under that gaze. Neph was the person he longed to see the most and at the same time hoped to never see again. She was the true reason why he had to leave the castle. Stirred awake by this fated meeting, a torrent of memories rose to the surface of his mind. If only he had known at the time. Well, it would not have changed anything, really. 4 months ago, on the night that they had ventured into the cursed sea on a boat made of demons' bones, Sonny was shivering in the wind. After an eternity spent in the cold embrace of darkness, the endless night of their escape was finally drawing its last breaths. He shifted and turned to the east, where a ghostly line of pale lilac appeared over the horizon. Trembling, he licked his lips and said in a raspy voice, Cassie, it's morning." After he uttered these words, the last remnant of strength that had kept Sonny going disappeared, and he slumped on the stones, his chest rising heavily and then falling. A new dawn was ready to bathe the desolate hell of the forgotten shore in warm sunlight. They had survived. The three sleepers were perched on a giant stone hand that protruded from the black waves, as if held above the lightless abyss by a goddess. Sonny and Cassie were holding each other for warmth, while Nephis was lying in the center of the stone palm, still unconscious. Visible through the gaps in the shattered armor, her ivory skin was pale and listless. We did it. They had escaped the clutches of Soul Devourer, sailed through the cursed darkness, and even lived through a battle with the horrifying dweller of the depths by some miracle. Sonny couldn't quite believe that they had actually managed to pull their daring escape off. From the moment he had learned about the enthrallment hex put onto their minds by the ancient fiend, he felt that the chances of ever saving themselves from the gluttonous evil tree were more than slim. Perhaps because it had taken away his most dangerous and tested weapon, his mind. And yet, somehow, they had succeeded. Utterly exhausted, Sonny closed his eyes and listened to the dark sea as it retreated to hide from the coming sun. Without even noticing it, he slipped into the embrace of sleep. When he awoke, the sun was already high in the sky. Sonny expected to feel crippled now that adrenaline had left his battered body, but, to his surprise, he wasn't in even half as much pain as he had anticipated. Blood weave was truly a miraculous attribute to have for someone as prone to disasters as he was. Even his broken finger wasn't hurting that much anymore. Sonny still had to groan while sitting up, though. Cassie was sleeping by his side, as drained by the events of the previous night as he was, perhaps even more so. Her delicate face seemed vulnerable and pale, twisted in an anxious frown. Sonny sighed. Nephis had yet to regain her senses. At some time while he slept, the blind girl had used her cloak to cover Changing Star, helping her to preserve some warmth. Neph lay still and motionless, her face drained of all color. Only the quiet sound of her breathing told Sonny that she was still alive. He trembled, remembering the harrowing sight of her mangled flesh, restoring itself in the crucible of purifying flame. Unleashing that flame always took a heavy toll on Nephis, bringing her unimaginable pain and suffering. Who knew what price she had paid to pull herself away from the doors of oblivion? He had not even realized before that she could use it to heal herself. Perhaps there was a reason why she had never done so in the past. Only time could tell. It's time to assess the situation. Turning away from Changing Star, Sunny looked around, trying to discern their current circumstances. His heart was heavy. If they had survived the attack of the tentacle monster and the ensuing shipwreck only to find themselves stranded in the middle of the cursed sea, with no way to continue forward, that would be a truly macabre twist of fate. To the east of them, there was nothing but the empty expanse of the colossal crater. Same thing for the Sunny froze, noticing a dark line in the distance. That was the western edge of the crater. They had almost crossed it. Feeling a strange excitement grasping his heart, Sunny quickly turned around and looked west. His eyes widened. For a few moments his head was silent and empty. Then a single thought appeared in it. We were so close. He sat quietly for a long time, forgetting about everything else. A few hours later, Cassie finally woke up, feeling that he wasn't next to her anymore. She called in a frightened voice. "Sunny?" He licked his lips. "I'm here." Cassie sat up and stretched her hand out, finding his shoulder. "Why? Why do you sound so strange?" Sunny blinked, then slowly turned his head to look at the blind girl. A tentative smile found its way onto his face. "Cassie, we found it. We have found that city you saw." In the end, Nephis had remained unconscious for 2 whole days. Sunny was really starting to worry about her. But then, on the 3rd day, Changing Star had finally come back to her senses. At the time, he was sitting on top of the giant hand's index finger, staring west with a warm, excited feeling in his heart. They did it. They were finally going to go home. Sunny couldn't wait to return to the real world. He didn't even care about becoming an awakened and the corresponding leap in power and status that much anymore. All he cared about was his soft bed, mountains of delicious food, and limitless hot showers. Sunny lowered his head and glanced at Nephis, trying to determine if there was anything wrong with her. In the webtoons, one of the characters was bound to suffer from something like amnesia right before things were about to take a turn for the better. But Changing Star seemed to be fine. She was still the same Neph he had known, tall, firm, and strangely distant, as though there was an invisible barrier separating her from the rest of the world. When the gaze of her striking gray eyes fell on him, Sunny felt his heart beating a little faster. He smiled. "Thank gods." Nephis frowned, lowered her head, and then asked in a flat tone, "Why are you smiling?" Realizing that he was grinning from ear to ear like a fool, Sunny blinked, then tried to shrug with false indifference. Abort, divert her attention. Look behind you. The sight of what lay in the west was one of the reasons for his good mood, so it wasn't that much of a stretch. Neff stared at him for a few moments, then sighed and turned around. Behind her, a tall city wall built of gray, polished stone towered above the slopes of the colossal crater. That wall was a sign that all their suffering was not in vain, and that all their dreams were about to come true. It was hope. Chapter 123, Helping Hand. Soon after Nephis had finally come back to her senses, they prepared to leave the shelter of the giant stone hand. The morning had just begun, so there was plenty of time to cross the remaining distance and climb out of the deep and vast crater. If all was going to go well, they would meet the next sunset on top of the tall wall of the mysterious city. Of course, numerous things could go wrong between now and then. But, for some reason, Sunny felt optimistic. This was a rare moment for his cynical, paranoid heart. Just like before, Sunny and Neff took turns climbing down a few dozen meters and lowering Cassie to one another with the help of the golden rope. However, they had grown considerably stronger since the last time they had to do it. Sunny remembered how tiresome it was to descend from the giant knight's statue in that way and chuckled. Now, he felt as though he could do it 3 times in a row and considerably faster too. Even though he had spent the last few days in an endless nightmare and brought his body to the point where it was about to shut down, now there was nothing but resilient strength filling his muscles. These 2 months that they had spent in the perilous hell of the Crimson Labyrinth, constantly fighting for their lives and slaying monsters that no sleeper should ever face one after another, had made all three of them much more powerful. Sunny doubted that a lot of Awakened had ever gone through this ruthless of an initiation and lived to tell the tale. Once he returned to the real world, he would most likely be considered one of the elite representatives of the current generation. That might actually be a problem. Well, he could always blame everything on Nephis. She was already close to being a mythical existence. The last daughter of the legendary Immortal Flame clan, one of the few Awakened in history who had managed to receive a true name in the first nightmare, the top student in her batch of sleepers in the academy, and so on. People would easily believe that a prodigy like her had been able and willing to carry two pathetic weaklings on her back all the way to the gateway. Sunny just had to choose his words carefully when describing the events leading up to their triumphant return. Luckily in that regard, he was a master. Entertaining himself with such thoughts, he didn't even notice the flow of time. Soon they were already approaching the ground. Just before jumping into the soft black mud, Nephis looked at Sunny and said, "Stay vigilant." She didn't have to remind him. Sunny knew that the last stretch was often the most dangerous, mostly because it was natural for people to allow themselves to relax in these moments, falsely believing that the worst was already behind them. Numerous Awakened perished tragically with their goal already in sight. He wasn't planning on becoming one of them. Sunny carefully lowered Cassie down, watched as Neph helped her step out of the rope loop, and jumped down. He landed on the ground in a nimble roll, immediately jumped to his feet and outstretched one hand, ready to summon the Midnight Shard at a moment's notice. However, nothing was trying to kill them. Sunny and Nephis exchanged tense looks and then slowly walked forward. With each minute, the distant gray wall was growing closer. At some point, Sunny gestured for Changing Star to stop and turned around, curious to take a look at the statue whose hand had saved them from drowning in the dark depths of the cursed sea. Out there on the slope of the colossal crater, slightly tilted to the side, a giant statue of a slender woman dressed in a light flowing robe towered over the black mud. She was lovely and graceful, with a slim waist and delicate arms outstretched to the skies, as though trying to embrace them. At least that was how she had looked once, a long time ago. Now one of the arms was broken off, with only its shoulder remaining in place. Luckily, the other one was still there, and had served as a safe haven for the three sleepers in their moment of desperate need. Just as Sunny expected, there were 7 shining stars carved into the stone surface of her robe. What piqued his curiosity the most, though, was the fact that just like the giant knight, the graceful woman seemed to be missing her head. Once again, Sunny wondered if these stone titans were created without faces to begin with, or if something had beheaded them much later in a fit of destructive rage. 7 severed heads guarding 7 seals, he thought, remembering Cassie's frightening vision. The mystery of that vision was nothing short of tantalizing. However, it seemed as though it was destined to remain unsolved. Sunny doubted that he would ever come back to this cursed place after returning to the real world. There were many regions in the dream realm, and almost every one of them was far better than the hellish Forgotten Shore. To hell with all this crap. Sending silent gratitude to the statue that had saved their lives, Sunny turned around and headed west. As they approached the section of the slope that was almost vertical, something dangerous finally happened. Just as Sunny was about to step on a wide stone buried in the mud, the stone suddenly shifted and rolled to the side. A terrible roar resounded across the vast emptiness of the colossal crater, making him shiver in fright. Fearing that something was crawling from under the soil, Sunny jumped back and summoned his sword. To his side, Nephis was doing the same, while Cassie swiftly stepped back to not be in the way. However, there was nothing moving in the mud. No giant beast rose from it to feast on their flesh. No horrifying abomination had extended its limbs to pull them underground into its maw. Then what made that terrible roar? Just as Sunny was trying to understand what was happening, a sharp pain suddenly pierced his right leg. Looking down, he saw the damn stone was chomping on his shin. The stone, which turned out to be a bizarre nightmare creature, revealed a mouth full of long, sharp teeth on its surface. It awkwardly rolled a couple of times to reach Sunny, and then tried to dig its fangs into his soft flesh. It might have bitten Sunny's leg clean off, but luckily the leather boot of the puppeteer's shroud turned out to be too tough for the stone's jaws, so it was just munching on the leather in powerless resentment. The situation was painful, but not at all dangerous. Sunny stared at the stone, then raised his head and glanced at Nephis in bewilderment. Her expression was as indifferent as always, but after all the time they had spent together, he was able to recognize the similar kind of amusement written clearly on her face. Sunny strained his muscles, raised the trapped leg into the air, and shook it a couple of times, trying to send the stupid stone flying. However, the weird monster was really stubborn. With another thunderous roar, it doubled its attempts to gnaw on Sunny's shin, its stone teeth on the verge of shattering from all the pressure exerted on them. What a pathetic thing. The only hope of killing me it has is if I die from annoyance, Sunny thought with a confused frown. How could a nightmare creature like this even exist? I guess there are losers even among their kind, eh? Shaking his head, Sunny allowed the shadow to wrap itself around the midnight shard and brought the tip of the blade down on the hungry stone with all the strength he had. The Tachi was met with some resistance, but managed to pierce and shatter the monster's stone body in the end. The bizarre creature died while still trying to take a bite out of Sunny, defiant till the very end. As the shattered remains of the stone fell into the mud, the voice of the spell whispered, "You have slain an awakened monster, Rolling Stone. Your shadow grows stronger. You have." Seeing a strange expression on Sunny's face, Nephis asked, "What's wrong?" He looked at her and blinked a couple of times. I just received a memory." Changing Star raised her eyebrow and said in an uplifted tone, "That is great. What type of memory?" Sunny scratched his head, hesitated, and then answered, It's a rock. An ordinary rock." Chapter 124, Desolation. Soon they were standing beneath the impregnable stone walls of the mysterious city. Behind them, the great chasm of the vast crater stretched to the horizon. Somewhere ahead, the lone human citadel in this loathsome region of the dream realm awaited. It promised to deliver them from this dark place and bring them home. Sunny really couldn't wait to be finally done with this nightmare. The city wall was built from massive slabs of gray granite, still wet from the cold touch of the cursed sea. The ancient weathered stones looked almost black, despite the thousands of years that passed since the mysterious builders of the wall had disappeared into the fog of time. It still looked monumental and unassailable. The joints between the granite slabs were barely wide enough to insert a narrow blade. Looking up, Sunny tried to guess the height of the wall. It had to be 60 meters tall, at least twice as high as the Awakened Academy defense barrier, which was constructed with the help of both modern technology and various aspect abilities. For a few moments, he wondered about the people who had erected this wall, the city behind it, and the giant statues that still stood lonesomely on the desolate shores of this cursed land. Their creations had withstood the onslaught of darkness and time, but the creators were gone. Who had they been? What terrible fate had befallen the citizens of the ruined city? But then, Sunny angrily shook his head. These mysteries had nothing to do with him anymore. He was going home, never to return to this awful pit of horror and despair. Let someone else solve them. After a short rest, they decided that it would be easier to climb the wall instead of circling it in search of an entrance. Even if they were to find a gate, there was no guarantee that it would be open. Climbing the wet granite was not an easy task, but they somehow managed. When there was nothing to use as a hold, Sunny and Nephis resorted to using their swords by inserting them into the joints between the slabs. A few unpleasant cuts later, they found the right rhythm and made quick progress. Enhanced by the consumed soul shards and shadow fragments, as well as the ruthless training regimen of the never-ending battle for survival, their bodies were full of strength and endurance. Both of them were at the peak of human physical ability. Pretty soon they had reached the top of the massive wall and climbed over its edge. Without even needing to catch his breath, Sunny hungrily crawled forward, jumped to his feet, and gazed down. In the ensuing silence, he could hear the sound of the golden rope scratching against stone. However, his heart was beating louder. Soon Nephis and Cassie joined him. The blind girl grasped his shoulder and asked, her voice bright and full of hope. "Sonny, what do you see?" He licked his lips. Beneath them, an expansive city lay in ruins. The beautiful stone buildings were broken and shattered, many of them turned into mere piles of rubble. There were no people walking along the wide streets, no clamor of voices to drive away the silence. Under the cold gray sky, the ruined city looked dead and mournful. It was impossible to say what terrible disaster had happened here. But it was clear that it was not natural. Many of the collapsed houses were blackened by fire, with claw marks cut into the still-standing fragments of walls. Here and there, monstrous bones of ancient horrors protruded from the ground, telling tales of desperate battles that must have had taken place on these streets once, a long time ago. Looking closer, Sonny felt cold sweat running down his back. There were strange shapes moving through the rubble, and even more hiding in the shadows. Seeing them filled him with an icy sense of dread. The ruined city was teeming with nightmare creatures. There is a vast, ruined city built of weathered stone, and there are numerous monsters wandering its streets, just like you said there would be. The tall city wall they were standing on was as wide as a road. It stretched endlessly in both directions, enclosing the vast ruins into a strangely perfect circle. Every so often there were towers built into its impenetrable granite body, serving as bastions against potential enemies. Who would have thought that one day this great barrier would serve not to repel the horrible monsters, but to keep the true horrors imprisoned inside? But Sonny wasn't that interested in the wall. He wasn't even too interested in the monsters. Instead, his eyes were drawn to the tall hill towering above the ruins. On that hill, there is a magnificent castle standing on a hill in the middle of the ruins. It looks like something out of a legend. Its walls are built from radiant white stone, with tall towers and majestic spires piercing the sky. It stands above the city like a symbol of hope, the only thing in this hell that seems to be untouched by the darkness. And a wide smile appeared on Cassie's face. "Yes, this is the castle I saw." However, Sonny didn't hear her. Just as he was describing the splendor of the bright castle to the blind girl, his gaze accidentally slid behind it. Now, all he could see was the dark silhouette of a cyclopean tower that loomed above the world like an unholy spear made out of solidified blood. As soon as Sonny saw it, his heart was gripped by an unexplainable fear. This was the Crimson Spire. The feeling of horror it emanated was enough to make him never wish to gaze at it again, and yet he wasn't able to look away. By his side, Nephis was staring at it too, her thoughts a mystery. There was a tense, dark expression on her face after a few seconds had passed. Changing Star was finally able to compose herself and turned away. Looking in the direction of the castle, she frowned and said, "The final stretch of the way to the citadel might be extremely dangerous. We must not hurry. Let's find a way down first." Chapter 125, A Feast in Time of Plague. Neither Nephis nor Sonny wanted to climb down from the wall, because that would leave them with no path of retreat should something terrible happen. Without the need to discuss it, they had decided to explore the nearest tower and see if there was a suitable way to descend from the wall inside of it. They followed the slightly bending wall north, keeping an eye on the ruins below. From time to time, Sonny was able to notice the shapes of creatures moving through the desolate streets of the ancient city. However, nothing seemed to be interested in scaling its tall granite bulwark. For the time being, they were safe. However, he didn't feel safe. Instead, he kept glancing at the distant axis of the Crimson Spire and shivering. That thing was seriously way too ominous. Good thing we will be out of here soon. That was the only thought that kept him from falling into an irrational panic. Their journey through the forgotten shore was about to end. They had endured a lot and survived through a lot at times. He had not even been sure that they were going to make it out of here alive. But now all their suffering was about to be rewarded. The path to freedom was already in their sight. They just had to overcome this one last hurdle to return home in glory. Soon they were closing in on one of the mighty towers built into the wall. The structure was round in shape, rising above the main embankment by a good dozen meters. There was a wide wooden gate leading inside the tower, which was broken a long time ago, with only a few splinters remaining on the ancient iron hinges. Behind the doorway, there was nothing but darkness. Sunny felt that the sight of this entrance was a bit creepy. Of course, darkness was nothing to him. And yet, suddenly Cassie tugged on his shoulder, forcing Sunny to stop. Both him and Nephis turned to her, their hands outstretched and ready to summon their swords. "What is it, Cassie?" Sunny asked, alarmed. In some situations, the blind girl was able to recognize danger before they could. Her keen hearing and sense of smell allowed her to sometimes perceive things that normal humans would not be able to. Now there was a scowl on Cassie's face. Turning her head slightly, she whispered, "Listen." Sunny held his breath and followed her words, straining his hearing to the limit. Soon, he was able to discern a strange sound coming from inside the tower. Chomp, chomp, crunch, chomp. It sounded like something was being devoured there, flesh and bones being ground by sharp teeth. The nauseating sound of meat being torn and chewed made him grimace. Sunny and Nephis looked at each other, then summoned their swords. Like usual before the two of them moved forward, Sunny sent his shadow to investigate the potential enemy. The shadow glided on the stones, quickly approaching the tower. Then, it dove into the darkness and concealed itself in the vast shade that permeated the structure. Sunny was able to see inside. The first thing he saw was several dead monsters lying on the stone in puddles of blood. The bloody trails left on the stone floor suggested that their massive bodies were dragged here by something very powerful. They were cut apart and eviscerated, as though dressed down by an enthusiastic butcher. Then, he saw a large pile of gnawed bones lying on the stones. Some of them still had pieces of meat stuck to them, while others were split apart and emptied of even the marrow. The next thing he saw was a fire burning in a circle of stone shards, with several skewers of monster meat roasting above it. Next to the fire, the source of the chomping and crunching sounds was sitting on the stones, munching on a well-roasted rib. It was a human. In fact, it was a young woman. She seemed to be only slightly older than the three of them. Sunny blinked. The young woman was tall and attractive. She had hazel eyes and beautiful brown hair, currently tied in a simple braid. Her build was extremely athletic, with perfectly defined lean muscles rolling under the dewy olive skin with each movement. And there was a lot of skin on display, since she only wore a provocatively short white tunic, augmented with bronze greaves, vambraces, and a cuirass with leather terrages. While Nephis was slender and lithe, this stranger radiated a sense of vitality and vigor. Everything about her was lavish and generous, screaming of strength, potency, and power. The strangest part, however, was that there was an absolutely relaxed, comfortable, and happy expression on her face. In the months spent on the forgotten shore, Sunny had never even for a second allowed himself to lower his guard completely. Neither had Nephis or Cassie. Even in the rare moments of rest, sheltered in reliable safety, they were always slightly tense, expecting all kinds of horrors to fall on them in an onslaught of teeth, poison, and claws. Even while under the hex of the soul devourer, there was always an invisible shadow in their hearts. However, the young woman seemed to be completely content with being in this cursed place. In fact, she looked happier than Sunny had ever been, even in the real world. As Sunny watched, the young woman messily devoured the meat of the unfortunate monster. The juices were flowing down her face and fingers. Done with the meat, she bit on the bone itself. His eyes widened. The adamantine bone of the nightmare creature was easily crushed between her teeth, and, closing her eyes in pleasure, the girl proceeded to suck out the marrow, then chew and swallow most of the bone itself. Crunch, crunch, chomp, crunch. Finished with the rib, she threw its remains into the disturbingly sizable pile of bones at her feet, loudly burped with no decorum whatsoever, then immediately stretched her hand out to pick up another piece of monster meat from the fire and sunk her teeth into it. Sunny blinked a couple of times more, then shifted his perspective back and looked at Nephis. "What did you see?" He lingered for a bit, and then said in a hesitant tone, "Well, it's either a very hungry human girl or a very gluttonous demon."